Dade Rule put his boot through the cabin door and walked in like he'd paid for the floorboards. He didn't say hello. He picked up the tin pail of goat's milk sitting by the stove, the only thing keeping a 2-week-old baby alive, and poured it out slow across the dirt while the mother screamed at him to stop. Then he dropped the pail, wiped his hand on his coat, and leaned over the crying newborn. 3 days, he said. You bring me what your husband took, or I come back and take the boy instead. Cry all you want, girl. Ain't nobody within 30 miles of this place. He was wrong about that, but only by one man. If a story about a lonely cowboy, a desperate mother, and a secret 20 years buried is worth your time tonight, hit that like button, subscribe so the next one finds you, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with me to the end. What that stranger saw in a mountain cabin changed everything. What? Colton Hayes had already decided not to stop. He was 2 days out of Bitter Creek with $14 in his boot, a horse that needed a shoe and no particular place to be, which was the way he'd arranged the last 20 years of his life on purpose. When he came over the shoulder of the ridge and saw the thread of smoke rising out of the pines, his first thought wasn't somebody needs help. His first thought was somebody's home, and I don't want to explain myself. He sat there a while anyway. Don't look at me like that, he said to the horse. It's smoke. People make smoke. The horse, a rangy gray gelding named Ash who had opinions, shifted her weight and blew out through her nose. It's near dark, Colton said, and that drawdown, there's got nothing in it but wind. He counted the smoke again. It was thin, wrong-colored. Green wood, badly stacked, burning too fast and giving off more smoke than heat. A man who knew what he was doing didn't burn green wood in October. A man who knew what he was doing had his winter split and stacked by August, which meant whoever was down there either didn't know or couldn't. He swore under his breath, turned Ash's head, and started down. The cabin sat crooked in a pocket of the mountain with a fallen-in lean-to on one side and a woodpile that wasn't a woodpile, just an armful of branches dragged in and dropped. There was a spade leaning against the wall with dirt still caked to the blade. No stock, no dog, no chickens, nothing alive out front except a mule tied on a short rope that looked at him with the flat, hopeless expression of an animal that hadn't been watered since morning. Colton stopped 30 yards out and called, because riding up on a cabin unannounced in this country was a good way to get shot by a nervous man. Hello, the house. Nothing. I got no business here, he called. I saw your smoke. I'm going to water my horse at your creek and ride on if that suits you. The door didn't open, but the shutter on the front window moved about 2 inches, and the black eye of a rifle barrel came out through the gap. Colton lifted both hands off the saddle horn, slow. All right, he said. That's fine. That's a fine way to say hello. You keep riding. The voice was a woman's, and it was shaking so bad the words came apart in the middle. My husband's inside. He's got a scattergun. That's so. He does. Then he's a patient man, letting his wife handle the window. Colton kept his hands up. Ma'am, I've been on the wrong end of a rifle 4 times in my life, and every one of them was a bad conversation. Let's not have a fifth. I told you to ride on. I'm going to. But that barrel's shaking so hard you're more likely to hit my horse than me, and she's the only friend I've got. Would you set it down? No. Fair enough. He lowered his hands to the horn anyway. You want to know something? I can smell your fire from the ridge. Green pine, wet at that. You're burning 3 times the wood you need to and getting half the heat. You got any seasoned oak in that lean-to? A pause. What? Oak, dry wood, deadfall, anything cut last year. I don't... The rifle wavered. I don't know. Ma'am, is your husband inside? The silence stretched out long enough that he had his answer before she gave it. Yes. All right. Colton nodded once. Then I'll say it to the both of you. It's going to freeze tonight. Hard. I've been on this mountain 9 days, and I can feel it coming in my knee, and my knee's never lied to me yet. That fire you've got won't hold past midnight. You want me to go? I'll go. But I'd like to leave you an hour's worth of dry wood first, and I'd like to water that mule, because he's about done. The barrel didn't move, but behind the door, thin and sudden, a baby started to cry. Colton closed his eyes for a second. Ma'am, he said quietly, set the rifle down, please. The barrel withdrew. The shutter clapped shut. He heard something heavy scrape across the floor inside. A trunk, maybe, or a table she'd been sleeping against the door with. Then the door opened about a foot, and he saw her for the first time. She was young. That was the thing that hit him first and hardest. She couldn't have been more than 22, 23, with a face gone gray and sharp from not eating, and hair she'd stopped pretending to fix. She had a baby held up against her shoulder with one arm and the rifle hanging off the other hand like she'd forgotten it was there. Her dress had been washed so many times the color had given up. "I got no money," she said. "Didn't ask for any. There's nothing in here worth taking. Ma'am, I want you to know that." Her chin came up. "Before you get any ideas, there's nothing in this house. Nothing. So if that's what you're—" "Lady." Colton swung down off the horse, slow, keeping his hands visible. "I'm going to walk over to that lean-to. I'm going to see if there's anything dry in it. Then I'm going to fill your water bucket, and I'm going to leave. You can point that gun at my back the whole time, and I won't say a word about it." She stared at him. The baby wailed. "There's a shovel out there," she said abruptly. "I saw it. You don't—" Her voice cracked. "You don't get to ask about it." "I wasn't going to." He turned his back on the rifle and walked to the lean-to, and it cost him more than he let on. There was a bad half-second in the middle where his shoulders locked up waiting for the sound. It didn't come. He rooted through the collapsed corner of the lean-to and found what he'd hoped for. A half-cord of oak somebody had split years back and stacked properly, buried now under the fallen roof and a season of pine needles. He hauled out an armload, then two more, and carried them to the door. She stepped back to let him in, and then stood between him and the baby's cradle box like a fence. The inside of that cabin told him more in 5 seconds than she'd said in 5 minutes. One chair. A table with a single tin plate on it. A cookpot with something scorched to the bottom. Bedding on the floor by the stove instead of on the rope bed, because the floor by the stove was warmer. And on the shelf, in a row, arranged with a care that made his chest hurt, 4 turnips, a fistful of dried beans, and a coffee tin that he could tell by the way it sat was empty. That was it. That was everything. "Where's your man?" he said. "He's hunting." "Ma'am." "He's hunting." Colton crouched by the stove and started pulling the wet pine out of it with his bare hands, hissing when it burned him, laying the oak in with the split faces turned inward. "That grave out back is fresh," he said, not looking at her. 2 weeks, maybe 3. It's dug narrow at the foot and wide at the head, which is how a person digs when they're doing it alone and they're running out of strength halfway. And there's blisters on your hands that have already gone to callus. He set the last piece of oak. "So he's not hunting?" She didn't answer. He blew on the coals, watched the oak catch, and only then stood up and turned around. She was crying without any sound at all. She hadn't moved. The baby had gone quiet against her shoulder in that exhausted way babies do when they've worn themselves out. "His name was Tom," she said. "Tom Quinn. He was 26 years old and he was the best man I ever knew, and he died on the 12th of September and I couldn't get him in the ground for 2 days because I couldn't lift him." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, hard, like she was angry at the tears specifically. "There. Now you know. Now you can go." "How'd he die?" "That's not your business." "No, it isn't." Colton picked up the water bucket. "I'll fill this." He went out. The cold was coming down fast now, sliding off the peaks. He filled the bucket at the creek and stood there in the half-dark longer than he needed to, telling himself the same 3 things he'd been telling himself since he came over that ridge. "You've got $14. You've got no business here. You are not the man for this." Then he found the tracks. They were in the soft ground at the creek crossing, and they were 3 days old at the outside. 5 horses, shod, moving together, and one set that had come back alone and stood a long while facing the cabin before turning away. He crouched over them with the bucket forgotten in his hand and read them the way another man reads a letter. Somebody had scouted this place. Somebody had sat their horse in that spot and looked at that door and taken their time about it. He went back inside and set the bucket down harder than he meant to. "How'd he die?" he said again. She looked up from the cradle box. "I told you, there's 5 riders been through your creek crossing inside of a week, and one of them came back by himself to have a look at your front door. So I'm asking you again, and this time I'd like the truth, because whether I sleep in that lean-to tonight or ride out depends on it." The color went out of her face entirely. "They came back," she said. Who did? Oh. She sat down on the floor all at once, like her legs had been taken out from under her. Oh, no, no, no. Ma'am, Rosalie. She was looking at nothing. My name's Rosalie. Rosalie. He crouched down so he wasn't standing over her. Who came back? And she told him. It came out crooked, out of order, the way real things do. Her husband Tom had signed on as a wagon hand out of Fort Ashby in the spring, working a freight line up the Cutter Road for a man named Dade Ruel. She hadn't liked it. Tom said it was good money, and it was, for 2 months. And then in July, Tom came home in the middle of the night with his hands shaking and said they were leaving, tonight, right now, and wouldn't tell her why. He said the less I knew, the safer I was. Her mouth twisted. Men always think that. It never once been true. They'd run, traded the wagon for the mule, come up into the high country to a cabin Tom said had belonged to a man he'd worked for once, empty 3 years. She'd had the baby in that cabin, in August, alone except for Tom, and it had gone badly enough that she still couldn't stand up too fast without the room tilting. And on the 12th of September, 4 riders had come up the draw. Tom saw them first, Rosalie said. He put me in the root cellar with Eli. He said, stay down, and don't come up, no matter what I heard. And I heard everything. She stopped, started again. I heard him talking to them. He was so calm. That's what I can't. He was so calm, like he was talking about the weather. And then the one in charge said, where is it, Tommy? And Tom said, it's gone. I burned it. And the man said, that's the wrong answer. And then? Then one shot. Her voice went flat. And boots. And them going through this house. Everything. Tearing it up for near an hour. And then them leaving. She looked at her hands. I stayed down there till the next morning, with the baby in my arms and my husband's blood coming through the floorboards over my head. That's... She stopped and put her fist against her mouth. You wanted the truth. That's the truth. Colton didn't say anything for a while. There wasn't anything worth saying, and he'd learned young that people talking at you was worse than silence when the wound was that fresh. What'd he take? He said finally. Tom, what'd he take off Ruel? I don't know. Rosalie. I don't know. She looked up, and there was something fierce and cracked in her face. Don't you think I've turned this house upside down looking? 6 weeks I've been in here with a baby and 4 turnips trying to find a thing I can't name so I can hand it over and be done. There's nothing here. Whatever it was, either Tom really did burn it or he hid it somewhere I'm too stupid to look. You're not stupid. You don't know me. No, ma'am, Colton said. I don't. The baby made a small, unhappy noise. Rosalie got up, slow, holding the wall, and went to the cradle box. And Colton watched her do a thing that he'd remember for the rest of his life. She picked up the tin pail by the stove, the empty one, and tipped it over the baby's mouth anyway, and let one bead of milk that had run down the inside come off the rim onto his lips. That's the last of it, she said, without turning around. 6 days ago, a man named Ruel came here and poured the rest of that pail on my floor and told me I had 3 days to give him something I can't find. 3 days was Tuesday. She set the pail down. So, now you know why I had a rifle on you, and now you can go. Colton stood up. He went outside. He unsaddled his horse. He led her into the lean-to and rubbed her down and gave her the last of his grain, and then he stood in the dark with his hands on the saddle and had the argument with himself he'd been circling for an hour. He was 41 years old. He had a bad knee, a worse shoulder, and a reputation in 3 counties for being nobody in particular. He'd worked cattle from the Salt Fork to the Nations and back, and he had never once in 20 years let himself get attached to a bunkhouse, a woman, a town, or a dog. There was a reason for that, and the reason had a name he didn't say out loud anymore. He carried his saddlebags back into the cabin and dropped them by the door. What are you doing? Rosalie said. You got a jar in this house? Something with a lid? What? A jar. On the shelf, there's a crock. He was already pulling things out of the saddlebags. A twist of jerky, a sack of coffee, a tin of condensed milk he'd bought in Bitter Creek because he liked it in his coffee and had felt foolish about the extravagance ever since. He set the tin on the table with a click. Rosalie stared at it. It's sweet, Colton said. Cut it half with clean water and warm it. It'll turn his stomach some at first, but it's better than nothing, and nothing's what he's had. Her hand came out and stopped an inch from the tin. "Take it," he said. "I can't pay you." Did I say a word about pain? Everybody wants pain. She said it without heat, like she was reciting a fact about weather. Sooner or later, everybody comes back around to it, and I want to know now, up front, what it is you're going to want. Because I've got nothing, and I've got a baby, and I would rather hear it now than at 2 in the morning. Colton set his jaw and looked at her for a long moment. "My name is Colton Hayes," he said. "I punch cows. I've been doing it since I was 13. I've got no wife, no children, no land, and no place I have to be before spring. I've done things I'm not proud of, and one of them was in a town called Redwater, and if you ever meet a man who was there, he'll tell you about it, and he won't be lying." He pushed the tin an inch closer to her. "But I have never in my life taken anything off a woman that wasn't offered, and I am not going to start in a cabin with a dead man buried out back. That's what I've got to give you, my word. It ain't worth much on the open market." Rosalie looked at him. Then she picked up the tin and turned away so he wouldn't see her face, and got the pot. He slept on the floor by the door with his rifle beside him and his hat over his eyes, and he did not sleep much. Around 2 in the morning, the baby woke and she got up to feed him, and Colton lay still and listened to her moving in the dark, and heard something that made the hair stand up on his arms. She was singing. It was barely anything. Under her breath, half hummed, the way a person sings when they're too tired to be embarrassed about it. 4 notes down and 3 up and a turn at the end that didn't go where you expected it to go. Colton lay there with his heart going like a hammer. He knew that turn. He knew exactly where it didn't go because he had spent 30 years knowing it, and he had never once heard another living person sing it. "Where'd you learn that?" His own voice came out wrong. Rosalie startled so hard the baby squawked. "I thought you were asleep." "That song." He sat up. "Where'd you learn it?" "I don't—" She sounded flustered. "It's not a song. It's just a thing. I don't know where it's from. I've always known it." "Always?" "Since I was little." "Mr. Hayes, it's the middle of the night." "Who sang it to you?" "Nobody sang it to me." Sharp now, defensive. "That's what I'm telling you. I don't know where it comes from. I've asked. I've asked people my whole life about a lot of things, and the answer's always the same, which is that nobody knows because nobody knew me before I was 5 years old, including me." She let out a hard breath. "Go back to sleep." Colton did not go back to sleep. He sat with his back against the door and watched the last of the oak burn down to a red seam in the stove, and he made himself count the ways this was nothing. People hummed, songs traveled. 1,000 women on 1,000 mountains hummed 4 notes down and 3 up, and it meant nothing at all. And a man who let himself believe otherwise. At 41 years old, after 20 years of dead ends, was a man asking to be broken all over again. He'd been broken like that before, 11 times. He'd counted. Twice in Kansas, 3 times in the nations. A girl in Ellsworth with the right age and the right hair who turned out to be Swedish and had a mother and father living. A woman in Cheyenne who'd taken $60 off him for a story that fell apart in 4 days. Every time, he'd told himself it was the last time. Every time, some part of him had gone out to a stranger's face, like a hand reaching in the dark, and every time it had closed on nothing. He wasn't doing it again. He said that to himself maybe 40 times before the window went gray. In the morning, he split wood. He did it because he needed something to do with his hands, and because it was true that she'd freeze without it, and he did it for 4 hours straight until his shoulder was screaming and he had a rick of dry oak stacked against the cabin wall taller than the door. Rosalie came out around 10 with the baby wrapped against her chest and stood watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "You're going to hurt yourself," she said. "Probably." "That's more wood than I could burn in 2 months. "That's the idea." He set another round on the block. "Where's your root cellar?" "Why?" "Because there's 5 men who know where this cabin is and 1 door on it. A person ought to know what's under her floor and where it comes out." Rosalie's arms tightened around the baby. "It doesn't come out anywhere. It's a hole." "Show me anyway." She showed him. It was a hole, 6 by 8, packed dirt, a ladder, and 1 shelf. He stood down in it with his hat off, looking up at the underside of the floorboards. At the dark stain in the wood, he could see even in that bad light, and he had to hold on to the ladder for a second. When he came up, she was waiting. "You saw it," she said. "Yes." "I can't scrub it out. I've tried 3 times." "Then don't." Colton put his hat back on. "It's not a stain, it's a marker. There's a difference. You don't scrub a marker. Something in her face moved. She turned away fast and busied herself with the baby's blanket. You could sink a second way out of that cellar, Colton said. It's 12 feet to the bank of that draw. 2 days digging. Why would you do that? So next time you go down that ladder, you're not going down into a box. Rosalie was quiet for a moment. You keep saying next time, she said, because there's going to be one. You don't know that. Ma'am, I've known men like Dade Ruel my whole working life. They don't forget and they don't get bored. He came here for a thing he wants and he killed a man over it and he didn't get it. He'll be back, and it won't be 5 of them next time. It'll be however many it takes. He looked at her steady. You need to be somewhere else. There is nowhere else. There's Fort Ashby. There's rules from Fort Ashby. She laughed, and it was an ugly little sound. Half that town takes his money. The freight contract is his, the lumber lease is his, the man who wears the star is his cousin. Where do you suggest I walk to with a 2-month-old and a mule? Denver? I have $4, Mr. Hayes. 4. And I can't sit a saddle more than an hour without bleeding, if you want to know exactly how it is, because I had a baby 6 weeks ago in this room with nobody but a scared boy of 26 to help me, and it did not go the way it's supposed to go. Colton looked at the ground. All right. So don't tell me to be somewhere else. Her voice was climbing. Don't come in here with your milk tin and your firewood and tell me the answer is to go somewhere, because I have thought about it every hour of every day for 6 weeks, and there isn't anywhere, and every time somebody says it out loud, I have to hear it again. All right, he said. I'm sorry. She stopped. She hadn't expected that, he could tell. I'm not going to tell you to go anywhere, Colton said. I'm going to stay 4 days. I'm going to sink you a second way out of that cellar and get a proper bar on that door, and I'm going to ride down to Miller's Bend and buy a milk goat, because a tin of sweet milk lasts a week and a goat lasts a year. He picked up the axe. And then, if you tell me to, I'll go. Rosalie stood there with her mouth slightly open. Why? She said. Because I've got no place to be. That's not a reason. Nobody does something like that for no reason. She took a step toward him. You've been looking at me sideways since last night, since I sang. You want something, and I want to know what it is. Colton set the axe down. There was a long space where the only sound was wind in the pines and the baby snuffling. I had a sister, he said. Rosalie's went very still. Her name was Josie. He said it carefully, like something he was carrying in both hands. She was 3 years old. I was 12. We were coming west in a train of 9 wagons out of a place that doesn't exist anymore, and on the 2nd of June in the afternoon, 6 men rode into our camp. He looked out at the trees. I was down at the water with a bucket, which is where I stayed. For 4 hours I stayed in that gully with a bucket in my hands, and I did not come up, because I was 12, and I was afraid. And by the time I did come up, there wasn't anybody left to come up for. Mr. Hayes, my mother was dead. My father was dead. 6 of the 9 wagons burned. He rubbed his mouth with the back of his hand. And Josie was gone. Not dead. Gone. I went over every foot of that ground twice, and I found her shoe, and I did not find her, and neither did the soldiers, and neither did anybody else, ever. Rosalie's hand had come up to her throat. So I've been looking, Colton said. 29 years. That's the reason you're asking for. I've chased 11 women across 4 territories on worse evidence than a humming, and every single time I've been wrong, and I have gotten very, very tired of being wrong. He picked the axe back up. So no, I don't want anything from you. Last night I heard a song and I made a fool of myself, and I'd be obliged if you'd forget it. I'll dig your cellar and buy your goat and go. He set a round on the block and split it clean and set another. Behind him, Rosalie said, What year? What? What year was your wagon train? He stopped with the axe up. 59. The sound she made was so small he almost missed it. He turned around. She had her hand flat against the cabin wall like she needed it. Her face had gone the color of ash. Rosalie. They found me in the spring of 60, she said. That's what I was always told, that a family named Ellery found a little girl at a way station on the Cutter Road in the spring of 1860, and nobody claimed her and nobody knew her name, and they wrote down that she looked about 4 years old. Her breath was coming fast and shallow. They called me Rosalie because Mrs. Ellery's mother was Rosalie. I never had a name before that. I've never had a... I don't have a birthday, Mr. Hayes. I have a guess. Every year I've had a guess for a birthday. Colton's hands had gone numb on the axe handle. That's a coincidence, he said. His voice didn't sound like his own. There were 100 wagon trains that year. There were children lost all over this country. That's a coincidence. Yes. It's a coincidence. Yes, she said. I know it is. And then, say her name again. Don't. Say it. Josie. He had to force it out. Josephine Hayes. Rosalie shook her head slowly, and there were tears standing in her eyes and not falling. It doesn't mean anything to me. I want it to. I'm standing here wanting it to so bad I could, and it doesn't. It's just a name. She wiped her eyes hard. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You told me you were tired of being wrong, and I did it to you anyway. It's all right. It isn't. No, Colton agreed. It isn't. He went back to the wood. He split for another hour without stopping, and she went inside, and neither of them said anything about it through the whole afternoon, and it sat in that cabin all day like a fifth wall. It was after dark when she brought it up again. He was greasing the door hinges. She was sitting by the stove with the baby against her shoulder, and she'd been quiet so long he thought she'd fallen asleep, and then she said, "When they found me, the Ellerys." He didn't turn around. Yeah. There was a list they had to file with the territorial clerk for a foundling, height and hair and eyes and, she paused, and any distinguishing marks, in case somebody came looking. Colton's hand stopped on the hinge. They wrote one down, Rosalie said. I've seen the paper. Mrs. Ellery kept it in her Bible box, and she showed me when I was 11, when I wouldn't quit asking, and I've had it in my head word for word ever since. And I have spent my whole life thinking it was the ugliest thing about me, because girls at school used to... She stopped. Rosalie, I've never shown a living soul except Tom. Her voice had gone very small and very steady, the way voices do when a person has decided something and is terrified of it. And Tom's under the ground out there. Colton turned around. She had stood up. She'd laid the baby in the cradle box. And she was standing in the middle of that ruined little room with one hand at the collar of her dress, shaking so hard he could see it from 6 feet away, and looking at him with an expression that was half hope and half pure animal fear, the face of somebody about to open a door they might not be able to close. Mr. Hayes, she said, please, just look. She pulled the shoulder of her dress down. And Colton Hayes, who had ridden into 100 towns and out of 100 more, who had buried his hopes so deep and so many times that he'd stopped being able to find the place where it was buried, stood in that cabin and could not move and could not speak and could not breathe. Because there, just under her shoulder, brown against the pale skin, was a mark shaped like a 5-pointed star. He had seen it before. He had seen it 1,000 times, in a wash basin, in a room, in a house that had burned down before this woman was old enough to remember her own name, on a little girl who kicked and shrieked and refused to sit still, while a woman with her sleeves rolled up laughed and said, "Hold her, Colt, hold your sister. She's got a star on her, and it'll never wash off." The axe he wasn't holding wasn't there. His hands were empty. He looked down at them like they belonged to somebody else. "Say something," Rosalie whispered. "Please, please say something." He couldn't. The fire popped in the stove and neither of them moved. Rosalie's hand was still holding the shoulder of her dress down, and her arm had started to tremble from it, and Colton stood 6 feet away with his mouth open like a man who'd been struck across the back of the head. Whatever was happening in his face was bad enough that she pulled the dress back up and stepped away from him. "All right," she said. Her voice had gone hard and fast. "All right, that's fine. Forget it. Sit down. Don't tell me to sit down in my own... Rosalie." He put his hand out and caught the back of the chair and pulled it around and sat in it himself, heavily, like his legs had quit. "I'm not telling you. I'm asking. Because I'm about to say something, and if I say it standing up, I don't think I'll get through it." She stayed where she was, at the far wall, with her arms crossed hard over her chest. "Say it then." "There was a wash basin," Colton said. "What?" "In the house I grew up in. There was a tin wash basin with a blue rim and a dent in it where my father dropped it off a wagon, and every Saturday my mother heated water on the stove and bathed the both of us in it, one after the other, and Josie hated it. She'd scream the roof down. She was 3 years old and she had lungs on her like a steam whistle, and she'd come up out of that water and try to run out the door soaking wet in February. He was looking at the floor. And my mother would say, "Hold her, Colt, hold your sister." And I'd get her by the arms and she'd twist, and my mother would go at her with the cloth and she'd say, he stopped. She'd say, "She's got a star on her, that one, right there under her shoulder. Says so plain as a sheriff's badge, and it'll never wash off no matter how hard I scrub. So quit hollering, Josephine." Rosalie made a sound like the wind had been knocked out of her. "Left side," Colton said. "Under the shoulder blade, high up, about the size of a 2-bit piece. 5 points, and the top one crooked, bent over sideways like it got tired." Her hand came up and pressed flat against her own back through the fabric, high on the left, and she didn't seem to know she'd done it. "Nobody," she said, "nobody has ever described that to me. In my life. No. You could have looked, just now. You could have looked, and then said, 'I could have.' People do that." She was breathing wrong, too fast and too shallow. "People do that. They take a true thing and hand it back to you like it's theirs. My whole life, people have, 'I know.' So how do I know?" She was almost shouting now. "How do I know you didn't just look at my back and make up a wash basin? How do I know you're not the 12th one, Mr. Hayes? Because you told me there were 11. You told me that yourself. 11 women you rode up to with your eyes shining, and every single one of them was wrong. So how do I know you don't?" That stopped her. "You don't," Colton said again. "And I don't either. That's the truth of it. There's a mark on your back, and there was a mark on my sister, and I have wanted this so bad for so long that I don't trust one thing my own head is telling me right now. I could be sitting here making it fit. Men do that. I've done it before." He put his hands over his face hard and dragged them down. "In Cheyenne, I did it for 4 days. I bought a woman a dress. I stood in a store and bought a stranger a dress because she said she remembered a red barn, and my mother's barn was red, and I was so happy I could hardly hold the money to pay for it. And she was gone with $60 of mine before the week was out, and I sat on the boardwalk in front of that store like a hit dog." Rosalie's arms came down slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be sorry for me. I'm not telling it for sympathy. I'm telling it so you know exactly what kind of man is sitting in your kitchen, so you can weigh what he says." He looked up. "I've been wrong 11 times. I might be wrong the 12th. But I need you to understand something, and then I'll shut up about it." "What?" "Not one of those 11 had a star on her back." The stove ticked. Rosalie sat down on the floor by the cradle box, folding down onto it the way she had that first night, and put her hands over her mouth and didn't take them away for a long while. "I don't remember you," she said finally, through her fingers. "That's the thing I can't get past. If it was true, if it was, wouldn't I remember something? Anything? A face? A brother? You were 3. People remember being 3. Some do." Colton rubbed the back of his neck. "I've thought about that more than you'd believe. There was a mule kicked a man I knew in the head, and he woke up not knowing his own wife's name, and he never got it back, and that was a full-grown man. You were a baby in the middle of the worst afternoon this country ever gave anybody. I don't think a mind that size keeps a thing like that. I think it puts it down and walks away from it on purpose." "That's a kind thing to say." "It's not kindness. It's the only sense I've been able to make of it." She was quiet. "Then, what was she like? Josie? Yes, her." Colton let out a breath, and something in his shoulders came down about an inch. "Mean," he said. Rosalie laughed. It came out of her by accident, and she looked shocked at herself. "She was," Colton said. She bit me on the arm so hard one time it went purple and stayed purple for a month, over a wooden horse I wouldn't give her. She wouldn't wear shoes. My mother would put shoes on her at the front of the house, and by the time you got her to the back, she'd have them off and hid somewhere, and she wouldn't tell you where, and she'd stand there with her chin up like a little judge and let you go through every room in the place looking." He shook his head. "She followed me everywhere, out to the woodlot, down to the creek, into the barn. I hated it. I was 12 years old, and there was nothing on this earth I wanted less than a 3-year-old dogging me around in front of my friends, and I used to hide from her. I'd get up in the loft and pull the ladder and listen to her calling for me, and I wouldn't answer because I was mad about something, or because I just wanted 20 minutes to myself." He stopped and had to work his jaw for a second before he could go on. And then on the 2nd of June, I went down to the water with a bucket, and I didn't take her, and she wanted to come, and I told her no. Mr. Hayes. So that's what she was like. Rosalie sat with that. Do you know what I think about when I think about it? She said. Not the raid. I don't have the raid. But there's a thing that happens sometimes when I'm not paying attention, and I've never told anybody because it sounds insane. Tell me. I get scared of the sound of horses. She pulled her knees up. Not one horse. A lot of them, together, at a trot. Tom used to laugh at me, and I'd laugh too, because what kind of grown woman goes white in the face at a livery stable? But I do. My hands go cold and I want to be under something. She looked at him. Under, not behind, under, like a wagon. Colton didn't say anything. Is that anything? She said. Or is that me making it fit, like you said? I don't know. That's an honest answer. It's the only one I've got. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. And they sat there a while with the fire going and the baby making his small sleeping sounds. And Colton thought that if he lived to be 90, he'd never again be as tired as he was in that hour. There's something else, he said. I don't know how much more of tonight I can take. Then I'll keep it till morning. No. She opened her eyes. No, say it, or I'll lie there all night making up worse. Colton reached into his shirt and pulled a leather thong up over his head. The locket that came out from under the collar was silver, or had been, and it was so scratched and dulled and thumbed over that it looked more like a river stone than a piece of jewelry. It was oval, no bigger than a walnut, and one edge of it was mashed flat, where something had stepped on it a long time ago. This was my mother's, Colton said. It's the only thing I've got out of that whole life. I found it in the grass with the wagon still burning, and I have had it around my neck for 29 years. And there's been maybe 3 times I nearly sold it, and one time I was hungry enough that I got as far as the counter. He worked the catch with his thumbnail. It took a few tries. The hinge was bad. There's a picture in it. It was a proper likeness once. It's not much now. He held it out. Rosalie didn't take it right away. She looked at his hand for long enough that it started to shake, and then she got up onto her knees and came across the floor and took it from him. She turned it toward the stove light. The paper inside had gone the color of weak tea, and the image on it had faded until it was mostly a suggestion. A man standing, stiff, with his hand on the back of a chair, a woman seated in the chair with her hair pulled back severe, a boy at her elbow in a coat too big for him. And in the woman's lap, a shape that might have been a child or might have been a bundle of cloth, tilted, blurred, because whatever she was, she hadn't held still. Rosalie looked at it for a long time. She moved, she said. She always moved. You can't even see her face. No, that's not fair. Rosalie's thumb went over the glass. That's 29 years and you can't even see her face. That's not, I know it. She kept looking. Colton watched her and made himself not hope, and failed, and made himself not hope again. The woman, Rosalie said. That's my mother, Ada. Her hair's pulled back. She wore it that way every day of her life. She had it long enough to sit on, and she never once let it down where anybody could see, except... He stopped because Rosalie had gone rigid. Except at night, she said. Colton didn't breathe. Except at night, by a fire, and she'd take the pins out, and it would come down all at once, and it was... Rosalie's voice climbed and cracked. It was so much of it. It was so much hair. It was like a curtain coming down, and you could put your hands in it. Rosalie, there's a knot in the floor. She had grabbed his wrist. She wasn't looking at him at all. She was looking at nothing, at the middle of the air, and her eyes were wide and wet and moving like she was reading. There's a knot in the floorboard by the door shaped like a fish, and you're not supposed to step on it. You have to jump it. And if you step on it, then you're... There was a game. There was a game about it. Bad luck, Colton said. He could barely get it out. You said it was bad luck. You made that up. You made that whole game up, and you enforced it like the law. You'd holler at my father if he stepped on it. He laughed at me. He did. He'd do it on purpose to make me holler. Her hand was crushing his wrist, and she'd sing. When she took her hair down, she'd sing that, the thing I sing, the 4 notes. That's her. That's her. And then she let go of him and put both hands flat on the floor and made a sound he had never heard a person make before, a sound like something tearing loose inside a chest. And she folded over her own knees on the floor of that cabin and came apart entirely. Colton didn't touch her. He wanted to, and he didn't know if he was allowed to, and by the time he'd decided that was a stupid thing to be thinking about, she'd already reached out blind and got a fistful of his sleeve. He got down on the floor and put his arms around her, and she cried against his shoulder like a woman with a hole blown through the middle of her, and he held on and looked over the top of her head at the wall, and could not see any of it, because his own eyes had gone useless. 29 years, she said into his shirt. I know. 29 years. I know. They stayed like that until the fire needed feeding. It went bad about an hour later, which he should have expected and didn't. She'd washed her face. She'd fed the baby. She'd come back and sat down at the table with the locket in front of her and turned it over and over, and Colton had made coffee out of the sack he'd brought and set a cup by her elbow, and for a few minutes it had been the most peaceful he'd felt in his adult life. Then Rosalie said without looking up, "Where were you?" "What?" "You said you looked. 29 years. She turned the locket over. "Where'd you look?" "Everywhere I could get to. The nations, mostly. First 10 years. Kansas, Texas twice. I'd hire on with an outfit long enough to get paid, and then I'd take the money and go somewhere and ask questions and run out and hire on again." "Did you ever come up the Cutter Road?" He'd known it was coming. He still wasn't ready. "Yes." "When?" 63, he said, and 71. Rosalie set the locket down very carefully. "I was at the Ellery place on the Cutter Road until I was 15, she said. "That's 18 and 71. "Rosalie, where'd you ask?" "In 63. Who did you ask?" "The agent at the crossing, the sutler. Anybody with us? Did you ask at the way station?" "I don't know," Colton said. "I don't remember. That was 23 years ago, and there were 4 stations on that road, and I asked at some of them, and I don't remember which." 4. She said it quietly. "There were 4. "Rosalie, don't do this." "I'm not doing anything." She stood up so fast the chair went back. "I'm asking a question. It's a fair question. You rode up a road I was living on, and you asked at some of them, and I sat in a kitchen 11 miles from wherever you turned around, and I asked Mrs. Ellery every year of my life if anybody had ever come looking for me, and every year she said no. Honey, nobody ever came." "I know." "You don't know." Her voice went up. "You don't. You gotta look. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? You gotta do something. You gotta ride around this whole country with a locket in your shirt turning over every rock, and I got to sit still. I was a girl. Girls sit still. I sat in that kitchen, and I sat in a wagon out of that kitchen, and I sat in a room in Fort Ashby, and I sat in this cabin, and the whole time the only thing I could do was wait for somebody to come, and nobody ever came." "I know that." "Then why didn't you come?" It rang off the walls. The baby startled awake and started to wail, and neither of them went to him. "Because I was 12, Colton said. "You weren't 12 in 71. "No." "You were a grown man in 71. "Yes," he said. "I was 26 years old in 71, and I rode the Cutter Road from the Bend to the Fork, and I asked at 2 stations, and it was raining, and I was out of money, and my horse had a split hoof, and I turned around. That's the whole story. There's no better version of it. I turned around because I was tired." He looked at his hands. "So you're right. You're right, and there's nothing I can say to it, and if you want to hate me for it, that's yours. You've earned it." Rosalie stood there with her chest heaving. The baby screamed. She went and got him and put him against her shoulder and stood swaying with her back to Colton and said nothing for a full minute. "I don't hate you," she said at last, and her voice was wrecked. "That's the worst part. I've had somebody to be angry at my whole life, and I never had a name for them, and now I've got one, and it's you, and I don't want it to be you. It ought to be the 6 men who rode into that camp. Well, they're not standing in my kitchen. No." She turned around. Her face was a mess. "I'm going to be ugly about this sometimes," she said. "I want you to know that up front. Not tonight, maybe, but there's going to be a day when the milk's spilled or the baby's screaming and it's going to come up out of me sideways, and I'm going to say something to you that isn't fair. That's what I am. Tom found that out. All right? That's it? All right?" "Rosalie, I hid in a gully with a bucket while my family died," Colton said. "You can be as ugly about it as you want. I've been ugly about it in every bunkhouse between here and the Brazos for 29 years, and there wasn't anybody there to hear it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Colt," she said. He flinched. He couldn't help it. That's what she called you, your mother, in the story. Yes. Can I? He had to look away out the window before he could answer. Yes, he said. In the morning, she wouldn't let him mention any of it, and he understood that, and they worked. He dug at the cellar wall for 3 hours and hit rock and had to move 8 feet down and start again. She boiled the last 4 turnips and made something out of them that neither of them enjoyed. Around noon, the baby was fussing so bad she had to walk the room with him, and Colton watched her go back and forth and finally said, "That boy's got a name?" "Eli," she said. "Elias. It was Tom's father's name." "Eli." He tried it out. "He's a loud one. He's hungry. That's what loud is." She kissed the top of the baby's head. "The tin's near gone. I'll go today. Miller's Bend is 14 miles. 14 down, 14 back. I'll be gone dark to dark." Rosalie stopped walking. "You'll come back," she said. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't quite a statement either. "Yes. Because there's a thing that's going to be in my head all day, and I'd rather say it out loud like a fool than let it sit." "Say it." "You've been looking for a little girl for 29 years, she said, "and what you found is a widow with a baby, and no money, and a dead man in the yard, and 5 men coming for her. That's not what anybody's looking for. That's not a reward at the end of a thing like that. That's a debt." Colton picked up his hat. "You've got a bad habit," he said, "of telling me what I'm thinking, and you are wrong about it every single time. Colt, bar this door. Don't open it for a voice you don't know. If somebody hollers that they're hurt, you leave them hurt." He pulled the door open. "I'll whistle 4 notes down and 3 up when I come back so you know it's me. Nobody else on this mountain can do that." He rode out, and he did not look back at the cabin, because if he'd looked back, he wasn't sure what he'd have done. Miller's Bend was a store, a smithy, a corral, and 11 houses that couldn't decide whether they were a town. Colton bought a milk goat off a widow named Pruitt for $9, which was 7 more than the goat was worth and 4 more than he had, and he made up the difference with his good rope and a Barlow knife he'd carried for 6 years. He bought flour and salt pork and beans, and a tin of peaches with money he didn't have either, and he was standing at the counter arguing the storekeeper down to credit, when the man said something that changed the shape of the afternoon. "You're the fella from up the Quinn place." Colton went still. "Say that again." "Up the old Verner cabin, where the Quinn boy was." The storekeeper wasn't looking at him. He was writing in his ledger. "Man was in here Tuesday asking about a cowhand up that way. Gray horse. Bad shoulder. Favors it when he lifts." "What man?" "Didn't give me a name, and I didn't ask for one." The storekeeper glanced up, and his eyes weren't friendly, but they weren't hostile either. They were the eyes of a man who has decided to say one useful thing and then be finished. "Rode a blood bay with a scar on the near shoulder like a burn, bought 40 rounds, paid in Ashby paper." "How many with him?" 3 outside. There's a 4th stayed down the road." Colton put both hands flat on the counter. "When?" "Tuesday," I said. "And you're telling me now?" "I'm telling you now because on Tuesday I didn't know you from a fence post, and today you're standing in my store buying a milk goat off Delia Pruitt for a woman with a baby, and I've got a wife." The storekeeper closed the ledger. "That's as far as I go, mister. I've got to sell flour to whoever rides in here, and some of who rides in here works for the freight line, and if you tell one living soul we had this conversation, I'll call you a liar to your face." "Understood. Take the peaches. On me. Get out of my store." Colton was in the saddle in 4 minutes, and he had the goat on a lead rope, and he made the first 6 miles at a pace that had ash lathered and blowing, and then he pulled up, because you can't run a horse 14 miles uphill with a goat on a string and expect to arrive with either of them. That was where he had the worst 10 minutes of the whole business. He sat there in the last of the light on a ridge with the mountain going blue in front of him, and he thought about what he was doing. He was one man. He had a Winchester with 11 rounds in the tube and a Colt he hadn't fired in 2 years, a bad shoulder, and 41 years on him, against 4 men, maybe 5, who did this for a living and got paid for it. He had, in the last 36 hours, found the only living person he was related to on this earth, and had, at the same time, walked into the middle of somebody else's blood feud over a thing nobody could even name. There was a road east from Miller's Bend. 3 days on it, and he'd be at the railhead. She had wood for 2 months now, and a goat and a rifle, And there were people at the bend who'd take a woman and a baby in if she showed up on their porch. Probably, most likely. He sat there and let himself think it all the way to the end. Then he said, out loud, to nobody, "You already did that once," and turned Ash's head up the mountain. It was full dark when he came up the draw. He whistled the 4 notes down and 3 up, and waited, and did it again. The door opened. She had the rifle. She lowered it. "You're late." "I had a conversation." "With who?" "Get inside," Colton said. "And bring a lamp out here. We're going to milk this animal before she deafens the both of us. And then I've got to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." They milked the goat by lamplight with Rosalie holding the bucket and swearing at it in a way that made him laugh out loud for the first time in that cabin. And the milk was warm and grassy, and Eli drank until his eyes rolled back and then slept for 5 straight hours, which she said afterward was the single best thing that had happened to her since July. Then Colton told her about the storekeeper. She listened all the way through without saying a word. When he finished, she said, "The blood bay with the burn scar. That's Ruel." "You're sure?" "I've seen that horse in my yard." Her hands were flat on the table. "He was here Tuesday?" That means when he was standing in that store asking about you, he'd already been here. He came here Monday. He came here Monday and poured out my milk and told me 3 days." "He wasn't asking about me Tuesday to find out who I was," Colton said. "A man doesn't buy 40 rounds to find out who you are." "Then what?" "He was counting. How many of us? What kind? Whether I'm a drifter who'll run or something else." Colton turned his coffee cup around. He'd have got the answer he wanted. Storekeeper would have said I was a cowhand with a bad shoulder, because that's what I look like. You are a cowhand with a bad shoulder." "Yes." Rosalie put her head in her hands. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks of nothing. Why now? Why'd he come Monday and not 4 weeks ago? That's the right question. Is it? It's the only one that matters. Colton leaned forward. "Rosalie, listen to me. A man like Ruel doesn't ride out to a cabin in the mountains and pour out a woman's milk for the fun of it. That's not business. That's a man losing his temper. Whatever Tom took, something happened in the last 2 weeks that made it urgent, and that means there's a clock on it, and that means Ruel's got somebody he's afraid of too." "Who's Ruel afraid of?" "I don't know. Somebody above him, a partner, a court date, a man coming out from the territorial office to look at his books." He spread his hands. "But he's not scared of you. He's scared of what Tom's got, and the reason he's scared of it is that it's not burned, and he knows it's not." Rosalie stared at him. "He knows," she said slowly. "He's certain of it. Certain enough to come back 6 weeks later. So the question isn't what did Tom take? The question is what did Tom do with it in the 4 days between coming home shaking and getting shot on his own doorstep, because he did something with it, and he did it somewhere close, and he did it without telling you. Why wouldn't he tell me? Because he thought that'd keep you safe. That's..." She stopped. She had tears in her eyes again, but they were angry ones. "That's the stupidest, most..." "Yes. He was 26, she said. "He was 26 years old, and he thought he was being noble, and now I've got a dead husband and a man on my porch counting to 3. "Yes," Colton said. "That's about the size of it. Now tell me about those 4 days." She got up. She walked to the stove and back. Then she pulled the chair around and sat down across from him and started talking, and they went at it for 2 hours by the lamp. He came in on a Thursday, in the night, and he wouldn't eat. Friday he was gone all day and came back with his boots muddy to the knee and wouldn't say where. Saturday he mended the mule's harness and mended it again and mended a bridle that wasn't broken, and he burned something in the stove that made a black smoke, and he stood over it till it was gone. Sunday he sat on the step and cleaned his gun and asked her, out of nowhere, whether she still had the little key. Colton's head came up. "What key?" "That's the strangest part." Rosalie frowned. "I've got a key. I've had it since I was a girl. It was in my pocket when the Ellorys found me. That's on the paper too, with the star. A little silver key, so small it wouldn't open anything I ever saw. It doesn't fit anything. It's never fit anything. I used to hang it on a string and pretend." "You have it now?" "It's in the cradle box under the blanket. Tom asked about it, and I said, 'Of course I've got it.' And he said, 'Good.' And that was all. He never mentioned it again. He was dead 5 days later." She rubbed her eyes. "I've thought about it 100 times. It doesn't mean anything. He was talking about everything that week." He wasn't. What? He wasn't talking about everything, Colton said. He wasn't talking at all. He'd stopped talking. That's what you just told me. He came home Thursday and wouldn't say a word, and then out of a whole silent week, the one thing he said out loud was about that key. He was very still. That's not nothing, Rosalie. She looked at him. Show it to me, he said. In the morning. In the light. Why not now? Because it's near midnight and I've been in the saddle since dawn, and I've got a thing to do at first light that's going to take 4 hours. And if I look at that key tonight, I won't sleep at all. What thing? That second way out of the cellar. He stood up and put his hat on the peg, which he had not done before, and which they both noticed. It's not a nice to have anymore. It goes in tomorrow if I have to dig it with a spoon. She almost smiled. You'd do it too. I would. Colt. She said it to his back, quiet. Thank you for coming back. Don't thank a man for that, Colton said. That's the floor. That's not the ceiling, that's the floor. He slept 4 hours. He was up before the sky changed, and he took the spade and went at the cellar wall in the dark by lamplight, and it went better than he'd hoped. The ground was sandy under the first 2 feet, and he made real progress. By full light, he was 11 feet in and could feel the cold coming through the last of it from the draw side, which meant one more day, maybe less. He came up filthy and drank a cup of coffee standing and said, Get the key. Rosalie fetched it out of the cradle box, wrapped in a scrap of cloth like something that mattered, and unwrapped it on the table. It was silver, blackened, about 1.5 inches long. The bow was flat and worked into a shape, a wreath or a knot. The bit was tiny and square-toothed. Colton picked it up and turned it over, and every drop of blood went out of his face. Colt? He held it up to the window. What? Rosalie said. What is it? What? There's letters on it. What? On the bow, under the black. He was rubbing at it with his thumb, hard, then with his shirt tail. Then he spat on it and rubbed again, and the tarnish came off in a smear and left 2 shapes cut into the silver, worn, but there. A.H. Rosalie's chair scraped back. Ada Hayes, Colton said. His voice had gone strange. That's my mother's key. That's off my mother's chest, the cedar one, the one with the iron corners that sat at the foot of her bed, my whole life. And she wore this key on a ribbon, and she never once let anybody touch it. And I have not thought about that chest in 29 years because it burned, Rosalie. It was in the second wagon, and the second wagon burned. Then how do I have the key? They stared at each other across the table. Somebody took it off her, Colton said slowly. Before the fire. Somebody took it off her neck and put it in a 3-year-old's pocket. Why would anybody? And then the goat started screaming. It wasn't a bleat. It was a high, ragged, panicked noise, and it was cut off halfway through. Colton had the Winchester off the table before the sound finished. He went flat against the wall by the window and put one eye past the edge of the shutter, and Rosalie was already moving for the cradle box, and neither of them said a word. Up on the ridge, black against the morning sky, 5 riders sat their horses in a line and looked down at the cabin. The one in front was on a blood bay with a scar on the near shoulder like a burn. Colton counted them twice before he moved. 5, he said. Get down the ladder. Colt, Rosalie, ladder. They're not coming yet. Her voice was thin, but she hadn't moved toward the cellar. She was standing over the cradle box with both hands on the edge of it. They're just sitting there. Why are they just sitting there? Because they want us to watch them. He worked the lever on the Winchester a 1/2 inch, saw brass, eased it shut. That's the whole point of standing on a ridge. If he wanted to be here, he'd have come up the draw in the dark and been through that door before the goat made a sound. Then why kill the goat? To tell you he can. She made a small, furious noise and picked Eli up out of the box, and the baby, who had been asleep, woke and began the long climb into a wail. Bar, Colton said. The board's by the door, both brackets. I know where it is, I watched you put it in. She got the bar up one-handed, and it fell into the second bracket crooked, and she had to set the baby down on the floor bedding to fix it, and she swore at it, and then she stood there breathing. Talk to me, she said. Say what we're doing. Say it out loud, or I'm going to start screaming, and I won't be able to stop. All right. Colton didn't take his eye off the ridge. First thing is, nobody's dying in the next 10 minutes, so quit holding your breath. He's got a mouth on him, and he'll want to use it. He'll come down under a rag and he'll talk. How do you know? Because he came Monday and talked instead of shooting, and men don't change. He shifted to the crack on the other side of the shutter. Second thing, that cellar wall's got about 18 inches of dirt left in it. 18 inches, Rosalie. 1 good hour. You said 1 more day. I said 1 more day at the pace of a man who thought he had one. He glanced at her. Can you swing a spade? I dug my husband's grave. That's a yes. That's a yes. Then when he starts talking, you go down that hole and you dig, and you keep digging no matter what you hear up here. Not fast. Steady. A person digs fast for 4 minutes, and then they're done. Rosalie's mouth was a hard line. And if I hear you get shot? Then you dig faster. That's not, there's 4 feet of dirt and a bank on the other side of it, and a stand of alder past that, Colton said. You come out in the draw with the baby, and you go downhill, and you don't look back, and you don't stop at the bend, you go past it. And you tell the first woman you find with a kind face exactly what happened here. That's the plan. That's the whole plan. Everything else I do today is buying you the hour. She stared at him. I don't like your plan. Nobody's ever liked one of mine. Up on the ridge, one of the horses moved. The line broke. 4 of them stayed, and 1 came down. Here he is, Colton said. Dade Rule rode down that draw at a walk, with a piece of white cloth tied to a stick and held up in his offhand like a man carrying a lantern, and he took his time about it. He was bigger than Colton had pictured, heavy through the shoulders, gray in the beard, a good coat gone shabby at the cuffs, and he sat that blood bay like a man who'd been in a saddle since he could walk. He stopped 40 yards out, which was exactly the distance a man stops at if he knows what a Winchester does at 30. Hello, the house, he called. Colton didn't answer. I know you're in there, Mrs. Quinn, and I know the cowhand's in there because his horse is in that lean-to and his goat's out here in the grass, and I'm sorry about the goat, that wasn't meant. Boy of mine got excited. Rule shifted the ragstick to his other hand. I've got a white flag up. I'd take it kindly if somebody'd say something back so I don't have to keep hollering at a woodpile. Colton put his mouth near the crack. Say your piece. There he is. Rule sounded almost pleased. What's your name, friend? Hayes. Hayes. All right. Rule nodded slowly. Mr. Hayes, I'm going to be square with you, because you look to me like a working man, and I've been a working man, and I've got no quarrel in the world with you. You rode up on a hard luck situation, and you did what a decent fellow does. Chopped some wood, bought the lady a goat. That's fine. That's exactly what I'd have done at your age. Get to it. I'm getting to it. He let the horse take 2 steps closer, and Colton put the front bead on his chest, and Rule stopped as if he'd felt it. Tom Quinn took something out of my office in July that don't belong to him. I want it, that's all. There's not a thing in this world I want out of that cabin except that. And once I've got it, I will ride down this mountain, and neither one of you will ever lay eyes on me again. He says it's burned. He said that to my face 6 weeks ago, and it cost him. Rule's voice didn't change. It ain't burned. How do you figure? Because a man who's burned a thing is loose in the shoulders, Rule said. He's relieved. He's got nothing left to hold. Tom Quinn stood on that step with his hands full and lied to me, and I've been buying and selling men for 30 years, Mr. Hayes, and I know what a man looks like when he's still holding. Behind Colton, Rosalie made a sound. Mrs. Quinn, Rule raised his voice. You hear me? I know you're at that wall. I'm going to say the rest of it to you, because it's yours to answer. Don't, Colton said to her low. Don't give him a voice to work on. He shot my husband on that step. That's exactly why. But she went to the crack anyway and put her face to it and said, I'm here. There she is. Something in Rule's tone settled, like a man who'd got the hand he wanted. Ma'am, I want to say a thing, and I want you to hear it plain, because I've thought about it. What happened in September was not what I came up here for. That got away from me. I had a man with me that day who is not with me anymore for exactly that reason, and I'd have handled it different if I could hand it back. You said, that's the wrong answer, Rosalie said. I heard you. I was under the floor, and I heard your voice say it, and then I heard the shot. Rule was quiet a second. Yes, he said. That's so. Don't you stand in my yard and tell me it got away from you. All right. Say what you came to say. Fine. The gentleness went out of him like a lamp turned down. The book. Your husband took a ledger book out of my office, brown, about so big, and a packet of paper with it. I want them today. And I know you've got the key. Colton felt the whole room change temperature. Rosalie stepped back from the wall like she'd been burned. "What key?" she said. "Don't." "What key?" "The little silver one, ma'am." Ruel said it patiently, the way you'd say a thing to a child who's stalling. "The one you carried out of the Cutter Road when you were 4 years old. The one your husband told me about while he was trying to save his own neck." Rosalie's back hit the wall. "He told you," she said. "He told me a good deal. He wouldn't—" "Ma'am, everybody tells." Ruel's horse shifted and he settled it with a hand. "That's the thing folks don't understand about it. It ain't a matter of character. Your Tom sat across from me in a freight office in Fort Ashby with his hat in his hands, and he told me he'd put my property somewhere I couldn't get to it, in a box that don't open without a key, and the key was with his wife. And if I gave him till the end of the month and $100 and a wagon out of the territory, he'd hand me the whole business and I'd never see him again." "You're lying." "I'm the last man alive who was in that room, so I don't have to lie, do I?" Colton had his eye on Ruel and his ear on Rosalie, and he could hear her breathing come apart behind him. "He wouldn't," she said. "He wouldn't put me in it. He wouldn't put me in it. He spent the whole summer trying to keep me out of—" "He put you in it in about 4 minutes, Ruel said. "And then he went home and got brave about it, which is the part I never can predict, and that's the part that got him shot." He raised the ragstick a little. "Now, I have been reasonable to a degree that my own people find embarrassing. 6 weeks I gave you, then 3 days. It's past all that. So here it is, Mrs. Quinn, the whole of it. You send that key out the door in the next hour, and you tell me where Tom put the box. And I take my men off this mountain, and you keep your baby and your cabin and that fella's firewood, or I do it the other way." "What's the other way?" Colton said. "The other way's ugly, and I don't enjoy it, and I'll do it anyhow. 5 men against 1 cabin. You'll lose 2. "I might lose 3. Ruel shrugged, and there was nothing in it, no bluff at all, and that was what made Colton's stomach turn over. "They're not my children, Mr. Hayes. They're 40 a month and found." Colton let 3 seconds go by. "Give me the hour," he said. "Hour," Colton said again, louder. "She's got to look. She doesn't know where he put it any more than you do, and you know that or you'd have had it in September." Ruel tilted his head. "Now that's the first honest thing anybody's said this morning." "Hour." "You've got till the sun's off that rock." Ruel pointed his chin at a slab of granite across the draw. "That's a touch better than an hour, and it's the last thing I'm going to give away today." He backed the bay 4 steps before he turned it, which Colton noted, because it was what a careful man did. "And Mr. Hayes, you're welcome to ride out. That's not a trick. Take your gray and go down the draw, and nobody'll lift a hand to you. You're not in this." "I'm in it." "Why?" Ruel actually sounded curious. "You met her Tuesday." "Monday," Colton said, and shut the shutter. He turned around. Rosalie was on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees up, and Eli screaming in her lap, and she wasn't hearing him. Her face had gone somewhere else entirely. "He traded me," she said. "Rosalie, he sat in an office and he traded me. He put my name in that man's mouth. Listen. I have been sitting in this cabin for 6 weeks telling myself my husband died protecting us." She looked up and her eyes were terrible. "That's the one thing I had. That's the one thing I got to keep, and it was worth something, and now I find out he sold me for $100 and a wagon and then got brave about it." Colton crouched down in front of her. "Pick him up," he said. "What?" "Eli. He's been hollering 40 seconds and you haven't heard him. Pick him up." Rosalie looked down at her own son like she'd forgotten he was there, and something in her face broke and reset, and she gathered him against her shoulder and put her mouth against his head. "Now hear me," Colton said. "You can have all of that, every bit of it. In 4 days you can lay on that floor and hate him for a week if you want, and I'll cook, and I won't say a word. But not now. Right now that's a rock in your pocket, and you have got to put it down." "How?" "By digging." "That's not an answer. It's the only one there is." He took her by the shoulder. "Rosalie, he's coming in that door in an hour. That's not a fear. That's a fact. That's on the clock like a train. Everything you feel about Tom Quinn is true, and it will still be true at sundown. Dig." She sat there one more second. Then she put Eli in the cradle box and dragged the box to the cellar hatch and went down the ladder with it, and Colton heard the spade start. and it was steady, and it kept going. He used the hour badly, which he knew even while he was using it. He'd meant to do 4 things and got through 2. He wedged the table on its side across the window wall, which would stop nothing but would slow a man climbing through. He soaked 2 blankets in the water bucket and hung them over the shutter cracks so a man outside couldn't see a shape move against the firelight. He'd meant to knock a loophole through the back wall and got 2 boards started and gave it up because the noise of it told them exactly where he'd be. He'd meant to go out and turn Ash loose so she wouldn't die tied in a lean-to, and he ran out of time, and that one sat on him. He counted his rounds twice and got a different number the second time, which told him more about his hands than about the ammunition. 22 for the Winchester, counting what was in the tube. 11 for the Colt, and 4 of those were old. He thought about the shape of it from Ruel's side because that was the only useful thinking left. Ruel needed her alive. That was the whole hinge. Ruel could burn this cabin flat in 10 minutes with a bottle of coal oil and a rag, and hadn't, and wouldn't, because a dead woman couldn't tell him where a box was. So they'd come in on foot, and they'd come to take, not to kill. Everybody except him. He was the one they'd shoot. That was worth something. That was worth quite a lot, actually, and he sat with it and felt his hands get steadier. He went to the hatch. "How's it coming?" "There's roots." Her voice came up muffled and furious. "There's roots in it the size of my arm, and the spade won't—" "Cut them. There's the axe. Hold it up close to the head and swing short." "I can't swing anything down here. There's no—" "Then chop. Don't swing. Chop, like you're breaking ice." A pause. Then a series of dull, hard knocks and the sound of something giving. "It's going," she called. "How far?" "There's— Colt, there's light. There's a little light coming through. That's the alder root you just cut. Widen it low, not high. Low, so you can crawl and not stand. I know that. Fine. I know that. Fine, Rosalie." He straightened up and looked at the sun on the granite slab, and there was maybe 8 minutes of it left. He went and knelt by the hatch again. "Come up a minute." "You just said, come up." She came up filthy, with dirt in her hair, and her hands bleeding at the base of the fingers, and Colton took the locket off over his head and put it in her palm and closed her fingers on it. "No," she said. "Yes." "No, absolutely not. You've had that since—" "That's exactly why." He held her hand shut around it. "There's 2 things in the world that are mine, and one of them's a horse. If this goes the way it might go, I'd rather it went down that hole with you than sat in a dead man's shirt on this floor for Dade Ruel to pick up and pawn in Fort Ashby." "Don't talk like that. I'm not being noble. I'm being practical, and there's a difference, and you'll learn it." He let go. "Put it in your dress." She put it in her dress. Her jaw was shaking. "Colt, go down. If you get killed on my floor," she said, "I want you to know I will never forgive you for it. Not one day. I'll be an old woman still angry at you." "That's fair." "It isn't fair. It's what I've got." She grabbed the front of his shirt with a bloody hand. 29 years. 29 years and 4 days. That's what we get? You don't get to— Rosalie, you don't get to be the answer to my whole life and then die in front of me on a Thursday. Colton put his hand over hers. "Then I won't," he said. It was a stupid promise, and they both knew it, and it helped anyway. She went down. He put the hatch cover most of the way over and dragged the bedding across it so it didn't read as a hatch from 6 feet off. And then he took the Winchester and sat down on the floor in the corner where the 2 walls met, because a man in a corner can only be shot at from 180 degrees instead of 360. And he waited. The sun came off the granite. Nothing happened for 4 minutes, which was worse than anything happening. Then a voice from up the slope, not Ruel's, younger. "Time's up, lady." Colton didn't answer. "You hear me? Time's up." He still didn't answer, and the silence stretched, and he understood that they were waiting for him to come to a window and give them a location, and he sat in his corner and let them wait. The first shot came through the shutter about a foot above where a standing man's head would be. The second and third came through the door, low, and one of them hit the stove and went off it with a scream that put a hole in the roof. Then a lot of them at once, from 3 directions, and the cabin filled up with the sound of it. Wood coming apart, tin ringing, the flat whack of lead going into logs. And Colton stayed in his corner with his forearm over his eyes, against the splinters, and counted. He counted rifles. 3, and one of them was a heavy old thing that boomed a half beat behind the others, which meant 2 of the 5 weren't shooting, and 2 men who aren't shooting during a volley are 2 men who are walking. He rolled out of the corner onto his belly and got his eye to the gap under the door. Boots. 20 feet enclosing, 2 pair, coming fast and low along the front wall where the shooter's angle couldn't reach them. Colton didn't have a loophole. He had 2 boards he'd started and given up on, and a bad shoulder, and about a second and a half. He put the muzzle of the Winchester against the half-started board and fired through it. The board blew out in a mess of splinters, and the man on the other side of it went down hollering, "Not dead," hit somewhere in the leg by the sound. And Colton worked the lever and fired again through the new hole at nothing in particular, just to make the hole a place where death came from, and the second pair of boots went backward at a speed that told him everything he needed to know about how much those men were getting paid. Then somebody outside was screaming, "He's got a hole in the wall! He's got a hole in the wall!" And the volley came back twice as heavy, and all of it low, chest high and lower, and Colton got flat behind the stove and felt something go across the back of his calf like a hot wire. He put his hand down and it came up red. He looked at it and thought, with a strange, dull clarity, "That's not the bad kind," and rolled on and kept moving. It went on like that for a while. He never afterward could say how long. It was not the long, clean duel it becomes in a story. It was ugly and stupid and mostly consisted of a middle-aged man crawling around on a dirt floor in the dark with wood chips in his hair, firing 3 or 4 times an hour at a shape or a noise, while men outside shot a cabin full of holes and yelled things at each other. Twice he heard the spade going under the floor, faintly, through everything, and both times it steadied him more than the rifle did. The second time it stopped. He waited for it to start again, and it didn't. He crawled to the hatch and got his mouth down to the crack. "Rosalie." Nothing. "Rosalie." "I'm here." Small and strange. "What?" "It's through." "What?" "It's through, Colt. There's a hole. I can put my arm out in the air. I can see the alders. I can see the—" Her voice cut off and came back different. "There's a man in the draw." Colton's whole body went cold. "Where?" "Below. Down where the creek bends. He's sitting a horse with his back to me, and there's a rifle across his saddle, and he's watching the bottom of the draw." The 5th man. The one who never came up. The one the storekeeper had mentioned, sitting down the road. And Colton had heard it and filed it and had not once, in the whole planning of this, put him at the bottom of the escape. He put his forehead against the boards. "Colt? I hear you. Say something." "I'm thinking." "Think out loud. I can't be down here in the dark while you—" "He's there because Rule put him there," Colton said, "which means Rule thought about the draw, which means Rule's a better hand at this than I gave him credit for." He wiped his face. "Can he see the hole you made?" "No, not unless he turns." "Is it big enough to crawl?" "Not yet. Nearly." "Then finish it and don't go through it." He shifted and his calf howled at him. "Rosalie, listen to me. That hole's no good as a door anymore. But it's still good for one thing." "What?" "Air and a way for you to hear what's happening in that draw. So you keep your ear at it and you tell me if that man moves." "That's not a plan." "No," Colton said. "It isn't." The shooting stopped around mid-afternoon. That was worse. That was much worse. It went quiet and stayed quiet, and Colton lay against the stove with his leg tied up in a strip of blanket and his hands starting to shake now that there was nothing to do with them, and listened to the wind and one bird and nothing else. Then Rule's voice came from much closer than it had been. "Hayes!" He was at the corner of the lean-to, 30 feet, maybe less. "You still with us?" Colton didn't answer. "I know you're breathing. I can hear you dragging. You got hit in the leg. That was Sim. He's the only one of them can hit anything." A pause. "You put a hole in Bailey's thigh and he's laying up there crying like a heifer, so I'd call that even. And I'd call it a day if you want to call it a day." Nothing. "Here's where we are, Hayes." Rule's voice was flat and reasonable, and it carried like he'd practiced it in barns. "It's going to be dark in 3 hours. I got 4 men, and one of them's hurt. You got a bad leg and a woman and a baby and a hole in the wall. Now I have thought about burning this place with the pair of you in it, and I want you to know the only reason I'm not is arithmetic, and if the arithmetic changes, I will do it in about a minute, and I will sit on that ridge and eat my supper while it goes." Colton got his back against the stove and let the man talk, because the man talking was the man not moving. So here's my offer, and it's the last one, and I'm not going to dress it up. Ruel's voice dropped. Send the woman out, just her. Not the child. Keep the child. I don't want it. I never did. She walks out that door and she rides with me down to the Werner claim, and she shows me where Tom put the box. And if she's telling the truth, I put her back on that step by tomorrow noon with my own hand. Colton spoke for the first time in 3 hours. The Werner claim, he said. There was a silence on the other side of the wall that lasted a half-second too long. And Colton Hayes, lying on a dirt floor bleeding into a blanket, felt the whole thing turn over. You know where it is, he said. I know where he went that Friday. That ain't the same as, you know where it is. Colton started to laugh, and it hurt his leg, and he laughed anyway. You've known since September. You've been up on that ridge all day shooting a cabin to pieces over a key. You don't want her to show you the box. You want the key. Hayes, because you already dug it up. He was talking loud now, and his voice was cracking, and he did not care. You dug up my mother's chest out of that claim 6 weeks ago, and you hauled it home, and you have been sitting in Fort Ashby ever since looking at a lock you can't open. That's why Monday. That's why the milk. That's why a man with a freight contract and a cousin with a star rides 14 miles up a mountain in October to yell at a girl. Because you got it home, and you couldn't get in it. The silence outside went on a long time. It's iron-cornered, Ruel said at last, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. A kind of tired disgust with the whole world. It's a foot of oak, and it's banded 4 ways, and I've had 2 men on it with a maul and a cold chisel for 5 weeks. You bust the hasp and the box is still shut. You go through the lid and whatever's in the top of it comes out in pieces, and half of what's in there is paper, and paper in pieces is worth exactly nothing to me. I need it whole, and I need it readable, and I need it in a courthouse in 11 days. 11 days. You're a smart man, Hayes. Don't get smarter. Somebody's coming to look at your books. Send her out. No. Then I'll come get her, Ruel said, and I'll do it in the dark, and I would rather not. It got dark. They came at the door about an hour after full night, 3 of them, with the 4th up the slope putting shots into the shutter to keep his head down. And they came fast, and they came with a log. The first hit put the bar out of the near bracket, the second broke the bracket. Colton fired twice into the door at chest height, and heard one of them grunt and go down off the log, and then the third hit came and the door came in off the top hinge and hung there, and a man came through the gap sideways with a pistol up, and Colton shot him from 6 feet, and the man sat down in the doorway and did not get up. Then the doorway was full of Dade Ruel. He came in low and fast for a big man, and he came in with a shotgun, and he fired it at the shape by the stove, and the buckshot took the stovepipe off and filled the room with smoke and ash. And Colton went sideways into the dark, with his ears gone to a high ringing, and the Winchester somehow no longer in his hands. He got up on one knee. His leg would not hold. He got the Colt out. Through the smoke he could see Ruel turning, breaking the shotgun, thumbing a shell in, and behind him another man coming through the broken door, and Colton knew with complete certainty that he was not going to get both of them, and probably not either. And then the hatch came up. It came up with the bedding sliding off it, and it came up fast, and Rosalie Quinn came out of that hole in the floor black with dirt to the elbows. And Dade Ruel turned toward the noise with the shotgun half loaded, and his face went slack with surprise because she was 3 feet from him, and she had come from under the ground. She hit him with the skillet. She hit him with her whole body behind it, both hands, coming up out of a crouch, and she caught him across the side of the face, and it made a sound in that little room like a church bell dropped down a well. The shotgun went one way. Ruel went the other. He went into the table and threw it and down onto the floor, and the shell rolled out of his hand and across the boards. The man behind him stopped dead in the doorway. That was all Colton needed, and it was more than he'd asked for. He put 2 rounds into the door frame an inch from the man's head, and the man went backward out of it and was gone into the dark and did not come back. And a moment later there were horses going up the draw, more than one, going hard. Then there was nothing but the smoke and the ringing and Eli screaming his lungs out from the mouth of the cellar hole. Rosalie stood over Dade Ruel with the skillet still up. Rosalie. She didn't move. Move. Rosalie. He's getting up. He's not getting up. Colton dragged himself across the floor and got the shotgun and threw it out the door, and then he found the Winchester under the wreck of the table and put it where he could reach it. Look at him. He's not getting up. Rule was breathing. His face on the left side was already going wrong, swelling out over the bone, and one eye was shut with it. He made a noise and rolled a little, and one hand came up and patted the floor like a man looking for his hat. "Get me the harness rope," Colton said. She didn't move. "Rosalie, rope. On the peg by the door, and then get your son because he's screaming and he's got a right to be." That got through. She put the skillet down on the floor very carefully, the way you'd set down something that might go off, and got the rope. And then she went and got Eli out of the cellar and stood in the middle of the wreckage, holding him with her whole face crumpled up. Colton tied Dade Rule's hands behind him, and then tied his feet, and then tied his hands to his feet, because his own hands were shaking so bad he didn't trust any single one of the knots. It took him a long time. Halfway through, he had to stop and put his head down on the man's back and breathe. When he was done, he sat against the wall with his ruined leg out in front of him and the Winchester across his lap and looked up. Rosalie had stopped crying. She was standing in the doorway of her own cabin with the door hanging off one hinge behind her, and a dead man on the step, and the cold coming in, rocking her baby, and there was dirt on her face in the shape of her own fingers. "I came up," she said. "You did. You told me to dig. I did. I dug for 4 hours and then it got quiet, and then it got loud and I heard the door go." Her voice was perfectly level and slightly wrong. "And I thought, I am not going to sit under this floor a second time and listen to a man I love get shot through it." Colton looked at her for a second and found he couldn't say anything at all. She looked back. "Say something," she said. "You never say anything when it matters." He wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist. "Our mother used to tell me to hold you," he said. "That's all I've got. That's the only thing in my head right now. She'd say, 'Hold your sister, Colt,' and I'd have her by the arms and she'd be twisting like a cat." His voice went out on him and came back. "And I've been trying to work out all day what I'd have said to her about today. And it's this. She hollered for me for 29 years and I never came, and today she came up out of a hole in the ground and got me." Rosalie crossed the floor and sat down beside him with her back against the wall and her son against her shoulder, close enough that her arm was against his arm. On the floor, Dade Ruel groaned. Neither of them looked at him. Nobody slept. The stovepipe was gone. Ruel's buckshot had taken it off 2 feet above the collar and put it through the roof, and without a pipe the stove couldn't be lit without filling the room with smoke, so the fire Colton had spent 4 hours building. The day he arrived sat dead and cold in the box while the temperature dropped. Rosalie got the pipe down off the roof around midnight by standing on the woodpile with the lantern, and it came apart in her hands, 2 sections of it crimped flat. "It's ruined," she said from the doorway. "How ruined?" "Ruined, ruined. There's a hole in it you could put your fist through." "Wrap it." "With what?" "Blanket wet down and a strip of the mule's harness over it. It'll smoke and it'll stink and it'll hold 4 hours." He shifted against the wall and his leg made him stop and start again. "Then we'll wrap it again." She stood there. "The mule's dead," she said. "I figured. They shot him at the picket. He's laying out there with his legs still in the—" She stopped and pressed her wrist against her mouth. "I've had that mule since Fort Ashby. Tom traded the wagon for him." "Rosalie." I know. It's a mule and there's a man on my step and I'm crying about a mule." She wiped her face with the back of her hand and left more dirt on it. "Take the harness off him. That's what you're going to say." "That's what I was going to say." "I'll do it," she said. "You can't stand up." He could not stand up. That was the plain size of it. The round had gone through the meat of his calf about 4 inches below the knee and out the other side. And the bleeding had mostly quit on its own, and now the whole leg had gone hot and stiff and stupid and would not take his weight for more than a second. He'd tried twice while she was on the roof. He'd gotten as far as the doorway both times and gone down on his hands both times. And the second time he'd lain there with his cheek on the cold floorboards 18 inches from a dead man's boot, breathing, and had had a bad minute he did not intend to tell her about. She came back in at 1 in the morning with the harness and a face like a closed door. "Boil water," Colton said. "There's no fire." "Then build one outside and boil it there because that leg's got a piece of my britches in it, and if it stays in there, I'm dead in a week, and it'll be an ugly week." Rosalie looked at him for a long moment. "You want me to dig in your leg," she said. "I want you to pour water through it. There's a difference, and it's a big one." "Have you ever done this?" "I've had it done, twice. Once by a Mexican cook in the Nations who was very good, and once by a man named Pruitt who was not. He got the blanket strip untied with his fingers, slowly, because his hands were not working right. The trick's in not being fussy about it. Fussy takes an hour and hurts worse. She built the fire in the lee of the woodpile with the wind pushing the smoke down the draw, and she boiled a pot, and she carried it in, and she knelt down beside him and rolled his pant leg up and looked at what was under it and went perfectly white. "Say something bad," Colton said. "What?" "Say something bad about it out loud so I know you're not going to faint on me." "It's," her voice was thin, "it's the color of a plum, and there's a hole in the front of it about the size of a dime, and there's a hole in the back of it that is not the size of a dime." "Good. All right. That's the truth, and now it's said, and it's not sitting behind your teeth." He put a folded piece of harness leather between his own molars, took it out again. "Pour." She poured. He'd meant to be quiet about it, and he was not. He got through the first pot in about half of the second, and then something behind his eyes went white and loud, and when he came back to himself, he was on his side with his forehead against the floor, and Rosalie had her hand flat on his back and was saying his name, over and over, the same two words. "Don't do that. Don't you do that. Colt. Colt." "I'm here." "You went away." "I'm here." He got his eyes open. "Is it out?" "There was a piece of cloth about as big as my thumbnail, and I got it, and I don't think there's more, but I don't know. I don't know how a person would know." "Then it's out." He put his head back down. "Wrap it. Not tight. You want it snug like a hand on a shoulder, not tight like a rope." She wrapped it. She was crying while she did it, and she did a good job anyway, and afterward she sat back on her heels with her bloody hands hanging and looked at the wreck of her home. The door off its hinge, the table in pieces, the shutter shot to lace, the black stain on the floor she'd never been able to scrub, and now more. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it and not be careful with me. Ask. How bad is it going to go for that leg?" "I don't know." "Colt." "I honestly don't know," he said. "It went through clean. That's the good part, and it's a big good part. But we washed it out with creek water in a cabin with a dead man in the doorway, and the next 4 days are going to tell us which way it wants to go. If it's cool in the morning and it's the same color it is now, we're fine. If it's hotter tomorrow than it is tonight. And there's a red line running up the inside of that leg toward the knee. Then we've got a very short conversation about Fort Ashby and a doctor, and I'd rather have it early than late. Fort Ashby. That's the only doctor inside of 60 miles, and you know it. Fort Ashby is his. Yes. Then we're not going to Fort Ashby." "We're not going tonight," Colton said, and let it lie there. Across the room, Dade Ruel said thickly, "You could go to the Bend." Rosalie was on her feet before Colton could get a hand on her. Ruel was awake. He had been awake, Colton judged, for some while. He was lying on his side where they'd left him with his hands and feet roped together behind him, and the whole left side of his face had swollen out over the cheekbone into something that didn't have a shape anymore, and the eye above it was gone entirely, buried. He was talking out of the right half of his mouth, and it came out slurred and wet. "There's a man at the Bend pulls teeth and sets bones," he said. "Weatherby. He's a butcher, but he's a sober butcher, which is more than Ashby's got." "Don't you talk," Rosalie said. "Don't you talk to us." "Ma'am, don't you ma'am me on my own floor." "All right." She stood over him, breathing hard. Colton watched her hands and did not say anything, because there was nothing useful to say, and because she was owed the minute. "He's tied," Colton said finally. "Rosalie, he's tied, and he's not going anywhere, and there's nothing you can do to a tied man that you'll be able to put down later." "I know that." "I'm not telling you not to." She turned and looked at him. "I mean it," Colton said. "I'm not going to sit here with a hole in my leg and give you a sermon about it. That man killed your husband on that step, and he's laying 6 feet from your son. If you pick up that skillet again, I'm not going to say one word, and I'm not going to think less of you for 1 minute of the rest of my life." He shifted. "But you'll have to carry it, that's all. Whatever it costs, it's yours to carry, and it costs more than people say, and you've got about as much as you can carry already." Rosalie stood there for what felt like a long time. Then she walked past Ruel and past the stove and picked up the skillet off the floor where she'd set it and hung it back on its nail. "There," she said. "It's on the nail." "All right. Don't make it a thing." It's not a thing. It's a skillet. Yes, Colton said. It's a skillet. Rule from the floor said, "That's the second time tonight that woman's had the drop on me, and I want it noted I wasn't unarmed for either of them." "Shut up," they both said, and then looked at each other, and Rosalie sat down on the floor and put her face in her hands and laughed until it turned into something else. The dead man in the doorway was named Charlie Sim, which they learned because Rule told them, unasked, around 2 in the morning. "He was the one shot your leg," Rule said. "Best rifle I ever had. Couldn't ride worth a damn." "Why are you telling me that?" "Because he's got a mother in Kansas, and somebody ought to know his name." Rule's one eye rolled toward the doorway. "You going to drag him out of there, or am I going to lay here looking at his boots all night?" "You're going to lay there." "That's fine." A pause. "You hit him in the chest from 6 feet with a Colt, and he didn't say anything at all. Did you notice that? People say things. He didn't say anything." Colton didn't answer. Dragging Sim out was the thing he'd been putting off for 3 hours, because he couldn't stand, and Rosalie shouldn't have to, and it sat there in the doorway getting colder and more real by the hour. She did it at first light. She got the harness rope around the man's ankles, and she pulled him out over the step and around the corner of the cabin and put a piece of tarp over him and set 2 rocks on the tarp. And then she went down to the creek and washed to the elbows and stayed down there 20 minutes. When she came back, she said, "There's a rider on the ridge." Colton got the Winchester into his lap. "How many?" "1. He's got a rag up on a stick." "Of course he does." The rider came down the same way Ruel had and stopped in the same place, and he was young, 22, maybe, with a bad hat and a face that had not slept. "Hello, the house," he called, and his voice cracked in the middle of it. "Say it," Colton called back. "Bailey's dying." "That's not my business." "He's got a hole in his thigh you can put 2 fingers in, and it's been going since yesterday morning, and I've had my belt on it all night, and it don't quit." The young man's horse fidgeted. "Mister, I ain't asking for anything. I'm telling you I'm taking him down to the bend to Weatherby, and I'd rather do it without getting shot in the back." "Who are you?" "Ward Pike." "You were the one in the draw." "Yes, sir." "Sitting on all day watching a hole in the ground." "Yes, sir." Pike's chin came up a little. "That's what I was told to do." Colton looked at Rosalie. Rosalie shook her head once, hard. "Come to 40 yards and stop," Colton called. Pike came to 40 yards and stopped. Up close he had a boy's neck and 3 months of somebody else's trouble in his face. "Here's how it goes," Colton said. "You take Bailey. You take Charlie Sim, and you take him to his people, because he's got a mother in Kansas and she's owed a body. And you leave 2 horses and every round of rifle ammunition on this mountain in a pile at the creek crossing where I can see it. That's most of what we—" "And you'll do it," Colton said, "because you're 22 years old and you are one bad decision from spending your life in a territorial prison for a land fraud. You weren't even smart enough to be a partner in, and I'm offering you the door." Pike didn't say anything. "How much does he owe you?" Colton asked. The boy's head came up. "What?" "Wages." "How far behind?" 3 months. "That's what I thought," Colton said. "That's what it always is." From inside, muffled and furious, Ruel shouted something that came out as noise. "Is he alive?" Pike said. "He's alive and he's tied, and he's going to stay both of those things," Colton said. "And in 11 days there's a man coming out from the land office to look at his books. And when that man gets to Fort Ashby, I intend for him to have something to read. You can be a name in it, or you can be a name on it. Think about which." Ward Pike sat his horse a while. "They're at the station," he said. "What?" "Station 3. On the Cutter Road, 8 mile down and 4 east." He was looking at the ground between his horse's ears. "Whatever you're hunting, he had it hauled there 5 weeks back, and it's in the freight shed, and there's an old man watches it who couldn't stop a cat. There. That's what I've got, and now I've got nothing else." Then he turned his horse and rode up the draw, and inside of 2 hours there were 2 horses standing hip-shot at the creek crossing, and a flour sack with 160 rounds in it, and a dead man and a dying one were gone off that mountain for good. Colton lay on his back on the cabin floor and stared at the roof and said, "Station 3. "That's not—" Rosalie stopped. She'd gone strange. "Colt." "I know." "Station 3 is where they found me." "I know," Colton said. "That's why I'm laying here trying to make my heart quit doing this." They argued for an hour about whether he could ride. He could not ride, and they both knew he could not ride, And they went at it anyway because Rosalie said she would go alone with Eli in a sling, and Colton said absolutely not. And she said she was not going to sit in a shot-up cabin for 2 weeks nursing a leg, while the one thing she'd wanted her whole life sat in a shed 8 miles away. And he said the leg wasn't the point. The point was that Ruel had a cousin with a star and men on a payroll, and she'd be riding a public road. And she said, then come with me. And he said, I can't get on a horse. And she said, then I'll put you on one. She put him on one. It took 40 minutes, and it was not dignified. She backed the horse against the woodpile, and he got up on the woodpile on his hands and one knee and dragged himself across the saddle on his belly like a sack of feed, and lay there for a minute with his ears roaring while she held the bridle and did not say a word about any of it. And then he got himself upright and got his good foot in the stirrup and let the bad leg hang. They tied Dade Ruel across the second horse with his hands lashed to the cinch ring, which he complained about steadily for the first mile and then quit. And they left the cabin standing open with the door off its hinge and the goat lying dead in the grass and the mule at the picket line. And Rosalie did not look back at it. Colton did. He looked at that crooked cabin for a long time as it went out of sight, and he thought about the 4 days he'd spent there and how much of a life a person could put down in 4 days. It took them until mid-afternoon to make 8 miles. Station 3 was a low stone building with a sod roof and a pole corral and 2 sheds, sitting where the Cutter Road came out of the hills onto flat brown country that ran east until it quit. There was smoke from the chimney and a line of wash and one wagon with a broken tongue and nobody in sight. There ought to be men here, Rosalie said. There ought to be. Ward Pike said an old man. Ward Pike said a lot of things, and I believed about 80% of it. Colton got the Winchester across the saddle. Ride behind me and to the left. The old man came out of the door with a coffee cup in his hand and stood on the step and watched 2 ruined-looking people and a tied man ride into his yard, and did not appear to find it especially remarkable. Well, he said. We're not here for trouble, Colton said. You brought a good deal of it anyhow. The old man squinted at the second horse. That Dade? It is. What happened to his face? A skillet. The old man drank some coffee. There's Justice. He was 70 if he was a day, with a white stubble and one eye gone milky, and he stood there in the cold in his shirt sleeves like the weather was a rumor. His name, he said, was Ollie Deakins, and he had been keeping that station since before the war, and he had been paid by 4 different outfits to do the same nothing, and Ruel was the worst of them, but not by as much as folks thought. They're gone, he said. The 2 that was here. Went out at dawn hell for leather when a boy come down with word, and they didn't say where and I didn't ask, on account of I never do. There's a chest in your freight shed. Deacon's milky eye didn't move, but the other one came around slow. There is, he said. Oak, iron corners, banded 4 ways. That's the one. 2 men have been at it with a maul for 5 weeks. 4 weeks, Deacon said. Then Dade told him to quit before they broke the lid in, and I wanted on the record I told him that first, the day they started, and he didn't listen till the 4th week, which is how he's always done business. He set his cup down on the step. Mister, before you get to asking, that box has been on my ground 29 years. Rosalie made a small sound. Say that again, Colton said. 29 years, come spring. Deacon scratched his jaw. It's unclaimed freight. It come in on a night in June of '59 and it never got claimed. And after 7 years I could have sold it and I never did. And I couldn't tell you why except I ain't sold much of anything I ought to have. Who brought it? A boy. What boy? I don't know his name and I never did, and that's the honest truth. Deakins looked out at the flat country. He come in the middle of the night on a horse that was done. 17, 18 years old, and he'd been crying so long his face had quit working. He had that box roped on behind him, and he had a young one asleep in his coat. Rosalie's horse shifted, and she didn't correct it. He put the box on my floor, Deacon said, and he put the young one on the bench by the stove. And I said, what am I supposed to do with all this? And he said, her name's on the box. And I said, whose name? And he said, hers. And I said, son, that ain't how a name works. And he stood there, and he said, I couldn't do it. That's what he said. He said, they told me to do it, and I couldn't. Nobody said anything. And I said, do what? And he didn't answer me. He got a drink of water at that bucket right there, and he went out and got on that horse, and it wouldn't hardly walk, and he went east, and that's the last of it. Deacon spat. Come spring, the Ellerys took the girl. Good people. Dull as fence posts, but good. and the box sat in my shed. Why didn't you tell anybody? I told everybody, Deacon said, with the first heat he'd shown. I told the army when they come through in 60. I told the territorial clerk twice. I wrote a letter in 64 and paid a man to write it better. There was a war on, and there was 200 people lost in this country that year, and there wasn't one soul in an office anywhere who wanted to hear about a box in a shed at Station 3. He picked his cup back up. So I kept it. That's what I could do. I kept it 29 years and I never let nobody sell it, and 4 weeks ago I stood in that shed and watched two men hit it with a maul, and I couldn't stop them, and if you want to know how that felt, you can go ahead and guess. Colton found he had to look away out at the flat country for a second. Mr. Deakins, Rosalie said. Ma'am, you put me on a bench by your stove. I did. Do you remember it? The old man looked at her with his one good eye for a long moment. You wouldn't take your shoes off, he said. It's the only thing about you I recall. It was a warm night, and you had these little shoes on, and you'd been asleep in a coat, and I thought, that child will rest better without them things. And I went to slip them off, and you woke up, and you fought me like a badger over it, and I gave it up. He shrugged. That's all I got. It ain't much. Colton put his hand over his eyes. Colt, Rosalie said. Colt, what? She wouldn't wear them, he said, and his voice came out ruined. She wouldn't wear shoes. Our mother'd put them on her at the front of the house, and by the back door they'd be gone and hid, and there wasn't a whipping on this earth would make her tell where. He wiped his face hard with the heel of his hand. And she'd stand there with her chin up like a little judge. Ollie Deakins looked from one of them to the other. Huh, he said. The freight shed had a dirt floor and a smell of old grain, and the chest sat in the middle of it on 2 blocks with a horse collar and a busted churn stacked on the lid. It was oak, dark with age, about 3 feet by 18 inches, with iron at every corner and 4 iron bands running around it, and along the front where the wood met the lid, there were maybe 40 bright new gouges where a chisel had gone in and skidded. The hasp was bent up out of shape. The lock plate below it was scarred and dented and had held. Rosalie stood in the doorway and would not come in. I can't, she said. You can. My hands won't. She held them up. They were shaking so hard she had to put them down again. Colt, I have wanted this since I was 11 years old, and I don't want it now. Isn't that? What is wrong with me? I don't want it now. I want to go stand outside. Colton was sitting on a crate with his leg out because he could not do anything else. Then go stand outside, he said. Don't be kind to me right now. I'm not being kind. I'm telling you the box will be here in an hour. It's been here 29 years. It'll wait. He looked at the scars on the lock plate. I sat outside a woman's house in Ellsworth for 2 hours once because I couldn't make myself knock, and she turned out to be Swedish, and I've never been sorry about the 2 hours. Rosalie made a wet sound that was almost a laugh. Then she came in. She got down on her knees in front of the chest, and she took the little silver key out of her dress where it had ridden the whole way next to the locket, and she held it in her fist against her mouth for a second. If it doesn't fit, she said, then it doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, I don't know what I'll... Rosalie, Colton said, put it in the lock. She put it in the lock. It went in a 1/4 inch and stopped, and Colton's whole chest caved, and then she wiggled it and it went the rest of the way with a small dry click, and she turned it, and 29 years of tarnish and a lock that hadn't moved since before the war turned over with a sound like a bone setting. She sat back on her heels. It opened, she said. Yes. It opened, Colt. I heard it. You have to. I'm not going to be able to lift it. My arms have gone. He got down off the crate onto the floor and dragged himself over, and the two of them put their hands under the lip of that lid together and raised it. The first thing was the smell. Cedar and old cloth, and something faintly sweet that neither of them could name, and that Colton would afterwards smell in his sleep for the rest of his life. The second thing was on top, and it did not belong, and they both knew it instantly. A brown ledger book about the size of a family Bible, and under it a packet of papers tied in string, and laid across the string, folded once, a piece of butcher paper with pencil on it. Rosalie took it up. Her hands were still shaking. The writing was bad. It was the writing of a man who'd left school at 9. Rose, this is yours. Not the book. The rest of it. I seen the letters on your key, and I knowed it the minute I seen the box. I was going to give it you at Christmas with a ribbon on it like a fool. If you're reading this, then something went wrong, and I am sorry. Rosalie read it 4 times. Then she folded it back along the crease he'd made, exactly along it, and put it inside her dress, and put both hands over her face and cried in a way that had nothing pretty about it at all. And Colton sat on the dirt floor beside her with his hand on her back and let her. He knew, she said, when she could. He knew, and he didn't tell me. He was going to. He was going to wait for Christmas. She laughed, and it broke apart. He was going to make a moment out of it. That idiot, that absolute, he sat on the one thing I ever wanted so he could see my face on a particular day, and then he got shot over it. Yes. I'm so angry at him. I know. And he found me my mother, she said. Tom Quinn found me my mother in a freight shed and hid a stolen book in her chest and died on the step. And I don't know what to do with a man like that. I don't know where to put him. You don't have to put him anywhere today, Colton said. Underneath the ledger was a piece of quilt, folded, and under the quilt was everything. Photographs first, in a tin case with a broken hinge. Proper likenesses, hard and clear, better by 100-fold than the ruined smear in the locket. A man with a heavy jaw and a mustache and a look on him like the photographer was wasting his time. A woman seated, hands folded, hair pulled back severe, and her mouth doing something at one corner that suggested she'd been told to hold still and was thinking about how long it would take. A boy of about 10 in a coat too big for him. And one on its own. A woman standing with a child on her hip, and the child was blurred at the hands and feet because the child had been moving, but the face had held. Round, cross, chin up. Rosalie put her thumb on it and could not speak. That's you, Colton said. That's me. That's the face. That is exactly the face. That's the face you make at me when I tell you to sit down. Shut up. That's the face you made at me last Tuesday. Shut up, she said, laughing and crying at once, and hit him on the arm, and then leaned her whole weight against his shoulder and stayed there. There was a bundle of letters in a ribbon, 30 or 40 of them, addressed in 2 different hands to Mrs. Ada Hayes at 3 different towns. There was a man's silver watch with the crystal gone. There was a bone-handled knife. There was a christening cup with a dent in it, and a child's copybook with Colton Jonas Hayes written at the top of the first page 4 times in a row, each one worse than the last. There was a cavalry medal in a paper twist, a dark ribbon, a brass device, the name J. Hayes scratched on the back with a nail, and Colton held it in his palm and said, "He never talked about it, not once in my life. My mother told me he had it and he told her not to tell me and she told me anyway." And at the bottom, wrapped in the quilt, there was a ledger of a different kind, a thin book with a marbled cover where Ada Hayes had kept the family's record. Births. A death, in 1854, a boy who lived 9 days. Weights and heights, and the day Colton walked, and the day Josie did. Recipes in the back. A running account of money owed to a man named Petty. The last entry was in pencil, and it was dated the 1st of June. Made 14 miles. Wind all day. Jay says we will see the fort by the 6th, and I have made him promise it twice. Colt is sullen with me and will not say why, but he mended the tailgate without being asked, which is his way of saying sorry, and I have let him have it his way. Josephine hid her shoes in the water barrel. When I asked her where they were, she said gone and would not add one word to it. She is going to be a trial, and I would not change one hair of her. Whatever comes of this country, I have got the 2 of them, and they have got each other, which is more than I had at their age. Tomorrow the hills. Nobody read it out loud. Rosalie read it and handed it across, and Colton read it twice, and the light in the shed had gone orange and long by the time either of them moved. Outside, somebody's horse stamped. Ollie Deakins could be heard talking to Eli in the doorway of the station, in the particular flat voice men use with babies when they don't want anybody to catch them at it. "She wrote that the night before," Rosalie said. "Yes." "She was mad at you about something." "She was always mad at me about something." Colton set the book down on his good knee and kept his hand flat on the cover. "I mended that tailgate. I remember mending it. I've never once in 29 years remembered why I was sulking." Rosalie leaned back against the chest. "They're real," she said. "That's the thing. Do you understand what I've had? I've had a hole. That's all. Everybody I ever met came out of somewhere, and I came out of a hole in the ground on the Cutter Road, and I made them up. I made up a mother about 400 times. She was different every time." She put her head back. "And she's in a book. She was cross about the wind." She was cross about most things. I'd have liked her. You'd have fought with her like two cats in a sack, Colton said, for about 40 years, and you'd have liked her. Rosalie laughed, and the laugh went out of her, and she sat looking at the open chest with the last of the light coming through the shed door. Colt, she said, there's a name for me in that book. There is. Say it once, out loud, just so it's been said in a room. Colton looked down at the page. Josephine Ada Hayes, he said, born the 14th of March, 1856, 6 pound and something. It's smudged. Rosalie Quinn sat on the dirt floor of a freight shed at Station 3 with her mother's handwriting in her lap, 29 years and 100 yards from the bench she'd been left on, and closed her eyes. March, she said. All this time I've been having my birthday in October. They stayed 2 nights at Station 3, and the first one nearly finished him. Ollie Deakins fed them beans and salt pork and boiled coffee strong enough to strip paint, and he put Rosalie and the baby in the back room where the mail sacks were kept. And he made Colton a bed on the floor by the stove because he said a man with a leg like that had no business on a bunk he'd have to climb down from in the night. Around midnight, Colton woke up cold in a room that was warm and knew what that meant before he was fully awake, and lay there in the dark arguing with himself about whether to wake anybody. He waited until 3, which was stupid, and he knew it was stupid the entire time. Rosalie found the red line at dawn. It had come up out of the wrapping and run 4 inches toward his knee, and the whole leg was hot to the back of her hand from ankle to thigh, and she stood up and walked out of the room without a word, and Colton heard her outside being sick. She came back in wiping her mouth. When did that start? Sometime in the night. What time in the night? Rosalie. What time? About 3. She sat down on the floor beside him and looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something he wasn't expecting. She slapped him across the arm, hard, with the flat of her hand. 6 hours, she said. You laid there for 6 hours. There's nothing anybody could have done at 3 in the morning that they can't do at 7. That's not why you did it, and we both know it. Her voice was shaking. You did it because you didn't want to wake me up and be a bother. You have been in my life 8 days, and I have watched you do that 9 times. You wouldn't say your shoulder hurt when you were splitting that wood. You wouldn't say you were hungry the first night when you gave me the milk. And now you've laid on a floor half the night with poison going up your leg because you'd rather die tidy than put somebody out. That's not... It is exactly it. She got up and started jamming things into a sack. Mr. Deakins, we need the wagon, and we need it now. He's for Weatherby at the bend. From the doorway, Deakins said, Tongues broke on that wagon. Then fix it. Take about 2 hours. Then you've got one, Rosalie said, and Ollie Deakins, who was 70 years old and had not moved fast for anything since the war, went out and got his tools. They laid Colton in the bed of it on a tick stuffed with straw, with Rule tied and sitting up against the sideboard, and Rosalie drove. And it was 14 miles of the worst road in that country, and it took most of the day. Colton spent about half of it awake. What he remembered afterward was Rule's voice going on and on above him, and the sky going by, and Rosalie's back. You want to know what I'd have done if it was me, Rule said at one point. No. I'd have gone east with the box. That morning, both of you, and the boy, and never mind the leg. 10 days you'd be somewhere nobody's ever heard of me. You've said that already. Because it's the sensible thing, and it keeps not sinking in. Rule shifted, and the ropes creaked. There ain't a court in this territory that'll hang a man for what's in that book. Fines, maybe. A civil judgment. It's paper crime, Hayes. Nobody goes to prison over a signature. You shot a man on his own doorstep. With no witness but a woman under the floor who didn't see it, Rule said, which is not a witness, which is a story. Ask any lawyer breathing. He let that sit. So what I'm telling you is you're going to spend a winter on this and come out the other end with a leg that don't work and nothing to show, and I'll be doing business out of a different town. That's how it goes. I've watched it go that way 40 times. Rosalie spoke without turning around. You keep talking like a man who's already lost, she said, and is trying to talk somebody into thinking he hasn't. Rule shut up for 4 miles. Weatherby was a heavy, sour man with a butcher's forearms and a shop that smelled of carbolic, and he took one look at the leg and said it was 3 days too late to be easy and 1 day too early to be interesting, which was as close as he came to reassurance. He opened both holes back up and put a probe through and irrigated it with something that made Colton white out twice, and packed it, and told Rosalie to expect fever for 4 days and to send for him if it went black at the edges. "And if it goes black," she said, "then I take it off below the knee and he learns to ride with one boot." Weatherby wiped his hands. "It ain't gonna go black. Somebody washed it out early with clean boiling water, and that's the whole reason he's still got a leg. Who did that?" "I did," Rosalie said. "Then you can quit looking at me like I'm the doctor." They stayed 9 days at Miller's Bend in 2 rooms behind the store, and that was where the whole thing turned. Not on the mountain and not in the shed, but in a back room with a fever in it and a brown ledger book on a table. The storekeeper's name was Harnett. He'd said his piece about not knowing Colton from a fence post, and then he'd gone and done the opposite of everything he'd promised, which Colton had come to believe was the ordinary way of most people. He put them up. He wouldn't take money. He asked exactly one question. "Is Dade Ruel in my hay barn tied up?" And when Rosalie said yes, he stood there a second and then said, "All right," and went back to the counter. Colton was too sick to read for the first 3 days. Rosalie read. She read the way she'd dug, steady and without stopping, at the kitchen table with Eli in a drawer beside her and a candle burning down. And by the 4th night she had 11 pages of notes in a hand that had started out careful and ended up furious. "Tell it to me," Colton said. He was propped up and mostly lucid, and his leg was the color of a bad sunset, but the red line had gone. "It's not complicated," Rosalie said. "That's what makes me want to throw it in the stove. I kept waiting for it to be clever." "Say it plain, then." "He files on land in dead men's names." She turned the book around. "Ashby's got a land office and a filing clerk and a fee. A man homesteads 160 acres, and if he dies before he proves up, the claim lapses and it goes back. Ruel doesn't let it lapse. He has a man sign the improvement affidavits. I have known the claimant, I have seen the dwelling, I attest he has resided upon the land. And then he files a transfer with a signature from a man who's been in the ground 18 months, and he pays the fee out of the freight account, and he has the deed. There's 31 of them in here since 1880. 31. 31. She flipped a page. And here's the part he was too proud not to write down. He keeps a column for what he paid the widow. It's in the book. $9, $40, $2, and a horse. He goes to these women and he tells them the claim's lapsed and worthless, and he'll take the trouble off their hands, and half of them thank him. Colton was quiet. "The Werner claim," he said, "is one of them, and so is the cabin." Rosalie's jaw set. "Colt, the cabin I've been living in," the one Tom said was empty 3 years, "is on a section Ruel filed on in 84 in the name of a man named Halvor Werner, who died of a burst appendix in 83. That's why Tom took us there. He knew it was empty because he'd seen the paper. He was so pleased with himself about it. And the affidavits." Rosalie put her finger on a line and didn't say anything. "Rosalie. 19 of them are witnessed by T. Quinn," she said. In his hand, he signed 19 affidavits saying he'd personally seen improvements on land he'd never set foot on, and Ruel paid him $3 a signature, and I know exactly what he told himself while he was doing it because I know what he told me. He said the freight line was good money and he was going to buy me a stove." The room was quiet except for the baby. "So he's in it," Colton said. "He's in it. He's not a boy who stumbled onto something. He was part of it for 2 months, and then in July he saw something that scared him. I think it's this. Here, there's a page where Ruel's writing about a man from the land office coming out to audit the filing clerk. And Tom got frightened and took the book and ran." She closed it. "That's my husband. That's the whole truth about my husband. He helped a man rob 31 dead men's families, and then he got scared, and then he found me my mother's chest and didn't tell me, and then he died on the step because he wouldn't give it back." "Rosalie, don't." She held her hand up. "Don't tell me he was a good man who made a mistake. And don't tell me he was a thief. I've been going back and forth for 4 nights like a woman losing her mind, and I've decided both are true, and I'm not going to pick. And if you make me pick, I'll say something to you I can't take back." Colton nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "That's it? All right? I've known about 200 men in my life, and I couldn't sort a single one of them onto one side of a line," Colton said. "I've been a bad man for an afternoon. There's a town called Redwater I told you about that first night, and I've never said out loud what happened there, and I'm not going to today. But the short of it is, I did something for money that I knew was wrong while I was doing it, and I was 24, and I've never once been able to decide what that makes me either." He shifted against the pillow. "So no, I'm not going to make you pick. He's your husband, and he's Eli's father, and he's both things at once, and you'll be sorting him out when you're 60. Rosalie put her head down on her arms on the table. That's the worst comfort I've ever been given, she said. It's the only kind I've got. I know. Her voice was muffled. I know it is. On the 6th day, Ward Pike came back. He rode into the yard behind the store in the middle of the afternoon and sat there until Harnett came out, and then he said he wanted to talk to the man with the leg. And Harnett said the man with the leg had a rifle in the bed with him and to keep that in mind. They talked in the back room with the door open. Pike stood the whole time with his hat in his hands. Bailey lived, he said. That's good. He's got a leg don't bend, and he's gone to his sister in Nebraska, and he says he's done. Pike turned the hat around. I've been thinking on what you said, about being a name in it or a name on it. And I signed 4 of them things. The boy's face was awful. I never read one. I want that said before anything else, because when I tell it, people are going to think I'm making it prettier, and I ain't. I can read some. I can read enough. I didn't read them because Dade held the paper and said sign here, and I signed here, and I was 17 the first time and 19 the last, and if I'd read it, I'd like to think I'd have... He stopped. I don't know what I'd have done. That's honest. I needed the work. Colton looked at him a long while. What do you want, son? I want to know if there's a way to do this that don't put me in the territorial prison, Pike said. And if there ain't, I want to know that too, and I'll do it anyway, but I'd rather know. I can't promise you a thing. I didn't ask you to promise. Then here's what I think, and I'm a cowhand, not a lawyer. Colton pushed himself up straighter. A man from the land office is coming to Fort Ashby to audit a filing clerk. He's coming to look at signatures. When he gets there, he's going to find 31 clean-looking files and a clerk who'll swear to all of them, and a freight man with a cousin wearing a star, and he's going to go home in a week having found nothing at all, because that's how it always goes. So what's different? What's different is he could arrive already knowing. Colton nodded at the table. That book puts the fraud on paper in Ruel's own hand with a column for what he paid the widows. Deakins' freight ledger at Station 3 puts the box and the hauling and the dates. And you and I have got something better than either one. What? A living man who signed and will say he signed. Ward Pike went pale. That's the whole thing, isn't it? He said. That's the whole thing. A book proves a scheme. A man proves a crime. Colton let the silence work. And I'll tell you the rest so you can decide with your eyes open. If you do it, you'll be the one everybody in Fort Ashby hates, because Ruel's got 60 men on a payroll and every one of their families eats off it. You'll never get work in that county. Some of it'll come out of your hide. And the best you'll get out of it is that a government man believes you and you don't go to prison. That's a poor trade. It's a terrible trade, Colton agreed. It's the only honest one on the table. Pike stood there with his hat. There was a woman at one of them places, he said, out on the Ridge Road. Dade give her $9, and I carried the money up to the door because he didn't want to get down. And she took it, and she said, "Thank you, sir." She said, "Thank you" to me. And I rode off that place with my hat on, and I have thought about it maybe 400 times. $9, Colton said. There's a line in the book. Is there? Pike's mouth twisted. No, that's fine. That's good. Let there be a line. He signed a statement that night at Harnett's kitchen table, and Harnett witnessed it, and Rosalie wrote it out in her careful hand because Pike's writing wasn't up to it, and it took 3 hours and 2 false starts. And at the end of it, the boy went outside and stood in the dark a long while by himself. The rest of it was paper, and it took the whole winter, and there was nothing in it that would make anybody's blood run. That was the part Colton thought about afterward more than the shooting. The night in the cabin with the door coming off its hinge had lasted maybe 40 minutes. Getting Dad Ruel in front of a judge took 5 months, and it was done with envelopes. They made 3 copies of everything. Rosalie did the copying, sitting up at night, page after page in that hand of hers, and the 11th night she threw the pen across the room and cried out of pure tiredness, and then picked it up and kept going. 1 copy went east by mail to the Territorial Land Office at the Capitol, with Pike's statement and Deacon's freight record, and a letter Rosalie wrote and rewrote 9 times. 1 copy went to a newspaper in a town 200 miles off that had no reason to be afraid of anybody in Fort Ashby. And the original ledger went into the hands of a lawyer in Cottonwood Falls named Adele Brister, who had been practicing 11 years and had never once been allowed to argue in front of the Ashby court and who read the first 15 pages standing up in her own doorway with her coat still on. "Where's Ruel now?" she asked. "In a hay barn at Miller's Bend," Rosalie said. Adele Brister took her spectacles off. "Ma'am," she said, "that's kidnapping. That is, at this moment, the single most serious crime any person in this story has committed, and it was committed by you." There was a silence. "Then what do I do with him?" Rosalie said. "You turn him over to a lawman today, and it can't be his cousin, and you will do it with me standing next to you, and a written accounting of every hour he's been in your custody." Brister put the spectacles back on. "You did a great many things right, and you did that one thing so wrong it could sink the whole business. And I'd rather tell you that in my office than have a defense lawyer tell you in a courtroom." Rosalie's chin came up. "He killed my husband. I know it. He poured out my baby's milk on my floor." "I believe you," Brister said. "And when we get there, I will make certain that a jury hears every word of it. But I need you clean, Mrs. Quinn, because the moment you are not clean, this stops being about 31 dead men and starts being about a woman who kept a man tied up in a barn for 11 days. And every newspaper in this territory would rather print the second story than the first." She was right, and it cost Rosalie 3 days to admit it out loud. They gave Dade Ruel to a deputy federal marshal at Cottonwood Falls on the 22nd of November, and Colton, on a crutch, watched it happen from the boardwalk. Ruel was thinner. The left side of his face had set wrong. The cheekbone had healed with a step in it, and the eye on that side didn't track. He looked at Rosalie for a while before they put him in the wagon. "Mrs. Quinn, I don't want to talk to you." "I know it. Say I said one thing anyway." He got his shoulders square, which took effort with his hands where they were. "Your husband sat in my office and gave you up in 4 minutes, and I told you that to break something in you. And it worked, and I watched it work through a wall. That was the meanest thing I ever done to anybody, and I've shot 2 men. He shifted. "It was also true. Both of them things are true, and I ain't taking either one back. But he did come home. He come home and got brave, and I want you to know I've thought about that since, laying in a barn, and I can't make it come out even either." Rosalie stood very still. "Is that an apology?" she said. "No, ma'am. I don't believe in them, and I wouldn't insult you with one." Ruel almost smiled with the half of his face that still worked. "That's a man telling you the truth on his way to jail because it don't cost him anything anymore. Take it for what it's worth." "It's worth about $9, Rosalie said. Ruel laughed once, and it turned into a cough, and then they put him in the wagon. The audit came out in March, and it was dull, and it was total. The filing clerk at Fort Ashby turned inside of 2 hours and gave the land office everything, including 4 things nobody had known to ask about. 26 of the 31 transfers were voided. Ruel went to trial in June on charges nobody in that country had ever heard of before: conspiracy to defraud the United States in the entry of public lands. And Adele Brister sat second chair to a government attorney from the Capitol who had a cold the whole trial and never raised his voice once, and it took the jury 4 hours. 14 years at the territorial prison, which was, as it turned out, not nothing at all. The murder charge for Tom Quinn went nowhere, exactly as Ruel had said it would. There was no witness who had seen it, and the man who had fired the second shot had been Charlie Sim, according to 2 people, and Charlie Sim was in the ground in Kansas. Rosalie sat in that courtroom and heard a judge say the words "insufficient to proceed," and she went out into the hall and stood with her forehead against the wall for a minute, and then she came back in. "That's the part I want people to know," she said to Colton that night. "If anybody ever asks, he's not in prison for Tom. He's in prison for paperwork. There's 31 families getting land back, and not one page of it says my husband's name in a way that means anything, and I have got to live the rest of my life with a courthouse telling me that. Can you?" "I don't know yet." She was quiet for a while. "Adele says the widows are the thing. Says 19 of them have written in. Says one of them walked 40 miles. "Then that's what it's for." "That's what it's for," Rosalie said. "That doesn't mean it's what I wanted." Ward Pike was not indicted. He testified for 2 hours and a half and did not once try to make himself look better, which the government attorney said afterward was the reason the jury believed the rest of it. He also could not get hired anywhere within 60 miles of Fort Ashby for the rest of that year, and in October he showed up at the mountain cabin on a borrowed horse with everything he owned in one sack and stood in the yard with his hat in his hands the way he always did. "I ain't asking for wages," he said. "You'll take wages or you'll ride on," Colton said. I'm not running a place where a man works for nothing. That's how the whole thing started. They put the cabin back together over this winter, and it was not a smooth business, and nobody who did it would ever call it one. The door had to be rebuilt from the frame out. The stovepipe was replaced with a length of pipe hauled from the bend on a borrowed sledge, and it never drew right afterward and smoked every time the wind came out of the north. The shutter Colton patched with 2 boards that never quite matched, and you could see the seam from across the room for as long as the cabin stood. He tried 3 times to plane the front step level and gave it up, and it stayed crooked, and every person who ever came to that house tripped on it once. His leg healed at about 60%. That was Weatherby's number, and it was accurate. He could ride all day if he got on from the left, and he could not run at all. And in cold weather, the whole calf ached down to the bone and made him bad-tempered in a way he never got good at hiding. There was a stretch in February where he was short with Rosalie for a week straight, and she finally put a plate down in front of him hard enough to crack it and said, "Say it's your leg or say it's me, but say one of them." And he said it was his leg, and it mostly was. She had her ugly turn in April, as she had warned him she would, and it came up sideways out of nothing exactly like she'd said. A gate hinge wouldn't set, and Eli had been screaming for 2 hours with a tooth coming, and Colton said something about the hinge, and Rosalie turned around and said, "You could have come up the Cutter Road twice more before I was 8, and you didn't," and then stood there in the yard with her hand over her mouth. Colton didn't say anything for a second. "I know," he said. "I didn't mean it." "You meant it a little." "I meant it a lot. That's the trouble." She sat down on the chopping block. "It's in me, Colt. It's just in me, and it's not going to come out. And it isn't fair, and I know it isn't fair, and about once a season it's going to come out my mouth. That's what you've got. That's what a sister is, apparently. Nobody told me." "Nobody told me either." He leaned on the crutch he still used in wet weather. "You want to know the truth? I'd rather have it come out your mouth in April than have you swallow it for 30 years and go cold on me. My mother had a sister she didn't speak to for 11 years over a piano. I remember hearing about that piano." Rosalie laughed wetly. "A piano. A piano. We've got a little more than a piano." "We've got considerably more than a piano," Colton said. "So we're going to have to be better at it than they were." The neighbors came in the spring, and that was the part that surprised him most, because he had never in his life had neighbors and did not really believe in them. It started with Delia Pruitt, who had sold him a $9 goat and had heard how the goat ended, and who rode up in April with a nanny in the back of a cart and would not take money for it. Then Harnett sent a boy up with 60 feet of good rope and a note that said only for the well. Then 2 brothers named Ostrander, who farmed a section on the flat and had never spoken to any of them, came up in May with a wagon load of milled lumber and stayed 4 days and built the barn. And when Rosalie tried to thank them, the older one got so uncomfortable he went and stood by the horses. "Our aunt," the younger one said, "down on the Ridge Road. She's one of the 19. She got 160 acres back in March that she'd been told was worthless for 4 years. $9, Rosalie said. $9, the man agreed. Where do you want this lumber? By that fall, there were 14 head of cattle on that mountain, wearing a brand Colton had drawn on the back of an envelope and never much liked. Rosalie kept the books, and kept them properly, in a ruled ledger with the columns squared off, because she had learned exactly what a well-kept book could do to a man, and she had decided she was going to be the kind of person who kept one. She was hard about money in a way Colton found funny and occasionally exasperating. She counted eggs. She wrote down a nickel. She also read every letter that came from the 19 and answered all of them, which took her most of 2 years. Eli walked at 11 months on the crooked step and fell off it and got up furious. He would not keep his shoes on. Rosalie found the first pair in the flour barrel and the second pair behind the wood box, and the third pair she never found at all. And the day she came out of the cabin with the empty flour scoop in her hand and a look of pure murder on her face, Colton laughed so hard he had to sit down on the chopping block and hold his bad leg. It's not funny. It's the funniest thing that's ever happened. He's not even 2. She was 3, Colton said. She was 3, and there wasn't a whipping on this earth would make her say where. Rosalie stood there in the yard with the scoop in her hand, and her face went through about 4 things and settled on something crumpled and bright. Well, she said, that's a mean trick. That's blood, is what that is. That's a mean trick, she said, and went back inside, and Colton heard her laughing in there, and then he heard her stop, and he gave her the 10 minutes. They put a marker on Tom Quinn's grave that summer. It was a slab of the granite from across the draw, and it took 3 men and a mule to move it, and Rosalie cut the letters herself with a cold chisel over 4 evenings, and made a mess of the queue and started the whole thing over on the back face. It said his name and the 2 dates and nothing else. She had gone back and forth on whether to put anything under it, and had come down on no. "I couldn't find a true sentence short enough," she told Colton. "There isn't one." "There's one for the shed." She meant Station 3. She'd had a small brass plate made for the wall of Ollie Deacon's freight shed over his objections, and the old man had grumbled about it for a year and then was found to have polished it. 29 years and he never sold it. That's a sentence. That's a sentence, Colton agreed. They never did find out who the boy on the dying horse had been. They tried. Adele Brister put a notice in 3 papers, and 2 men wrote in claiming it, and neither of them held up under 4 questions, and after a while Rosalie let it be. "I've decided about him," she said one evening. "Have you?" "He was one of them," she said. "That's what I think. I think he was 17 years old, and he rode into a camp with 5 other men on the 2nd of June because somebody told him to, and then he saw what it actually was, and he took a box and a child and a horse, and he went to the only place he could think of. She was watching the light go off the peaks. And then he couldn't stay and say it, because he'd have hanged. So he went east, and he never told anybody, and he died somewhere as a man who'd done that one thing right and could never tell a living soul about it." Colton thought about it for a long time. "That's a hard way to live," he said. "It's how most people live." She shrugged. "The good thing they did and can't mention, and the bad thing they did and can't mention. Everybody I've ever met is carrying both. And the whole business of getting along with people is deciding which one you're going to look at. There is a thing that people say about this kind of story, and it is nearly always wrong. They say a family was made whole. They say the missing piece was found and put back, and the picture was complete. And it makes a fine sound, and it is not what happened on that mountain, and pretending otherwise does a disservice to everybody who has ever actually lived through the losing of somebody. What was lost stayed lost. Ada Hayes stayed dead, and so did the man with the heavy jaw, and so did 6 wagons and the people in them, and so did a 26-year-old freight hand who signed 19 affidavits. He never read, and then found his wife's mother in a shed and meant to put a ribbon on it. Nobody got those back. Josephine Hayes did not come home. A woman named Rosalie Quinn came into possession of a name she had never worn, and she wore it exactly twice, once on a marriage record she never had cause to use again, and once on a deed. She stayed Rosalie. Colton never once called her anything else, and it turned out that was not a failure of anything. She was Josephine for 3 years, and Rosalie for 26, and the 26 were real too. That was the thing they both had to learn, and it took them longer than either would have guessed. And Colton did not get his sister back. He got a woman with a temper and a head for numbers who kept a rock in her pocket about the Cutter Road and threw it at him about once a year. That is not the same. It is not even close to the same. It is, however, the only version of it that was ever on offer, and a man is a fool who turns down what's on offer while waiting for the other thing. He thought about that a great deal, sitting on that porch. He had spent 29 years searching, which sounds like devotion and is at least partly a way of never having to arrive anywhere. 11 women. 11 wrong ones. And every time he'd been wrong, he'd gotten back on a horse, and there had been something in the getting back on the horse that suited him, because a man riding towards something has an answer for every question anybody asks him, including the ones he asks himself at 3 in the morning. Standing still is harder. Staying is harder. It took a hole in his leg and a mountain and a woman who wouldn't let him be tidy about it to teach him that the search had been, in some part he didn't like, a place to hide. The other thing he came to believe, and he was not a man who believed many things, and he'd have been embarrassed to say it out loud, was about the shape of how it ended. Because it did not end with the gunfight. He'd shot a man in a doorway, and Rosalie had put a skillet across Dade Ruel's face, and both of those things were necessary, and neither of them fixed anything. What fixed it was a brown book, and a boy who was willing to say I signed it, and an old man who wouldn't sell a chest, and a lawyer who told a grieving woman the things she didn't want to hear, and 19 letters answered over 2 years. It was paper and patience and other people. That is a great deal less exciting, and it is the only thing that has ever actually worked, and the fact that nobody makes a story out of it is probably why it keeps having to be done over from the beginning by somebody new. The evening it finally sat right in him was in September, 4 years on. Eli was 5 and out in the yard doing something loud and pointless with a stick. Ward Pike was down at the new tank with a shovel, and there was a hired girl in the kitchen singing off-key, and there were 80 head on the mountain and a lion on 40 of them. The barn the Ostranders built had a sag in the roofline that no one had ever gotten around to correcting. Rosalie came out with 2 cups and handed him one and sat down on the step that had never been level. "He's got no shoes on," she said. "I noticed. I've quit." "That's the correct decision. Our mother didn't quit, and it cost her about 4 years of temper." "Then I'm smarter than she was." Rosalie drank her coffee. "Colt." 14th of March. "What about it?" "It's my birthday, and I'm going to be 33, and I don't want to fuss." She said it fast, like she'd been practicing. "But I would like it if we ate something better than usual, and if you told the one about the wooden horse." "You bit me." "I've heard. That's why I want it told." She leaned her shoulder against him. "Eli ought to have it. He ought to grow up knowing that his mother was a mean little animal who bit her brother purple, because I grew up knowing exactly nothing, and I'd like him to have more than he can use." Colton looked out at the yard. He thought about a 12-year-old boy in a gully with a bucket. He'd carried that boy for 29 years and had never once been able to set him down, and he did not set him down that evening either. That is not a thing a person sets down. What had changed was smaller and more useful. He had stopped organizing his entire life around him. 14th of March, he said. "I'll tell it." "Good. I'll tell the one about the shoes, too. He'll get ideas. He's already got ideas. He's got them from you, and you got them from her." Colton put his boot up on the crooked step. "That's the only part of anybody that actually goes anywhere, near as I can tell. Not land and not money. Just some little mean, stubborn thing that shows up again in somebody's kid 3 generations down and won't wear shoes." Rosalie didn't answer. She started humming instead without noticing she was doing it, 4 notes down and 3 up, and that turn at the end that didn't go where you expected it to go. And out in the yard, the boy with no shoes on hit a fence post with a stick, and the sun went off the granite slab across the draw, the way it did every evening, on time, whether anybody was watching it or not.